Welcome, everyone. I ask unanimous consent the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. Again, that's documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement for 5 minutes. Today's hearing continues the subcommittee's efforts to improve highway safety through policy and program reviews within the Department of Transportation as we work towards reauthorizing our nation's surface transportation programs. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA for short, estimates nearly 41,000 people died in motor vehicle-related crashes in 2023. While this was a 3.6% decline from 2022, fatalities are still up compared to the last decade. Driver behavior has changed considerably since 2020. After pandemic-era closures began in March of 2020, driving trips dropped by 60% and speeding risk increased by 64%. These risks have only increased as traffic enforcement declined after police officers were discouraged from, quote, non-essential contact, and radical political movements called for the defunding of police across the country. This came to a head in 2021 when traffic fatalities jumped more than 10%, the highest number of fatalities since 2005, and the largest percentage increase since 1975. Today, car travel has returned to normal, but traffic enforcement has not. According to a New York Times report, traffic stops have declined by as much as 91% in cities since 2020. Again, 91% in cities since 2020. Underfunded and understaffed police forces mean there are no real consequences for drivers' illegal actions, and it has only paved the way, pardon the pun there, for drivers to speed, drive while impaired, and make reckless decisions endangering others on the road. We have also seen the increase in traffic fatalities disproportionately affect our rural communities. In 2022, NHTSA found 40% of all traffic fatalities occurred in rural areas on non-interstate roads, despite the fact that only 20% of the population resides in these rural areas. Fatality rates remain 1.5 times higher in rural areas than in urban areas. Our rural roads often have narrower lanes, limited shoulders, exposed hazards, and limited clear zones. And drivers tend to be riskier when there is less traffic and fewer traffic patterns that require slower speeds. 68% of our public roads are in rural areas, and 77% of all roadways are maintained by local governments. The backlog for rural road and bridge maintenance was more than $180 billion in 2022. States and local governments need flexibility to implement programs that address the shortfalls in our rural communities. States also need reliable, consistent programming, such as the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which addresses maintenance backlogs and ensures roads meet safety standards. Our current and future road design standards can help drive down fatalities across our communities. Pavement and guardrail standards should adapt to new vehicle technology, such as electric vehicles, which weigh more than traditional vehicles. We should consider if updates to the design standards for guardrails are necessary to absorb the heavier weight and help prevent these heavier vehicles from crossing the median into oncoming traffic. We also need to continue to address work zone safety. Reckless driving puts our roadside workers at greater risk of injury or death. According to the Association of General Contractors, 64% of contractors reported a motor vehicle had crashed into their work zone since 2020. Now, this number is simply unacceptable. Again, enforcement can discourage reckless driving in work zones, but we can also look at ways to better design work zones and related traffic patterns to curtail these incidents. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today who will be able to share what's working, what's not, and how we can continue to make our roadways safer. We don't have unlimited funds, as we all know, and it's crucial that we make strategic investments that are proven to save lives. I now recognize my distinguished ranking member, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank Subcommittee Chair Rouser for holding this hearing on the safety of our nation's surface transportation. Safety must continue to be the cornerstone of our work as this subcommittee considers the next surface transportation reauthorization bill. Make no mistake, we are living through a public health crisis in transportation. 40,990 people died on our roadways in 2023. Urban and rural communities alike suffer from infrastructure that has traditionally prioritized the quick movement of cars over the safe movement of people. These deaths are not inevitable. Taking a comprehensive approach to safety saves lives. That includes designing roads that prioritize safety for all users, including pedestrians and bicyclists, equipping vehicles with the latest safety technologies, and continuing to work to crack down on impaired driving. A safe systems approach ensures that when human error does occur, it need not be a death sentence. The bipartisan infrastructure law took safety seriously. States and localities now have unprecedented resources to tackle the safety crisis. The BIL increased funding for the Highway Safety Improvement Program by 34% to help states implement data-driven safety plans. It created a new vulnerable road user special rule to direct more dollars to projects that protect those not traveling in vehicles. And through the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, the BIL covered 75% of the nation's population with roadway safety plans. The BIL's targeted investments are making a difference. The troubling upward trend in traffic fatalities has declined since 2022, and projects that adhere to complete streets design principles are making a difference. Vehicle design is also part of the solution. Last year, NITSA issued a new standard to require automatic emergency braking to reduce crashes. This rule is anticipated to save 360 lives and prevent at least 24,000 injuries per year. We have the knowledge and tools to respond to the urgency of the roadway safety crisis. The rhetoric around traffic safety has finally begun to change. Transportation leaders now acknowledge the shared responsibility to build roads that are safe for everyone. But words are not enough. The Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill this subcommittee considers must take concrete steps to design, build, and rebuild roads that prioritize the safe movement of people regardless of how they move. We must enhance the transparency and accountability of our transportation infrastructure design making to tackle our safety crisis. The BIL is making important progress toward the vision of zero roadway deaths. We must keep this positive momentum going. Thank you To our witnesses today, I appreciate your input regarding the safety of the nation's transportation system and look forward to our discussion about the challenges ahead. I yield back.
I'd now like to recognize our ranking member of the committee, of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and for holding the hearing to highlight safety in transportation. Tragically, nearly 41,000 people were killed on U.S. roads in 2023. These fatalities make me and make thousands of families ask, is safety a priority or not? Roughly 95% of fatalities on our roadways occur on our roadways. So as we work on a surface reauthorization bill, we have to make sure that improving safety is a top priority. We can invest in infrastructure while prioritizing safety at the same time. When America builds, when America builds, Americans travel safely. The bipartisan infrastructure law takes safety seriously. It provides $16 billion for highway safety improvement to help states improve road and bridge infrastructure. Nearly $6 billion for a new Safe Streets and Roads for All to support local governments in deploying safety solutions. And over $8 billion to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration for efforts to improve driver safety. The bill also reforms how we build and protect road users. New safety measures include incorporating complete street principles in roadway designs and equipping new cars with new safety technology like automatic emergency brakes. These efforts work together to make infrastructure safer, to raise driver awareness, and reduce higher risk scenarios. And the next bill must put safety first and build upon the funding and policies in the BIL. Now, in my state, 813 people died in 2023 on our roadways. It represents a 10% increase from 2022 and the highest number of traffic deaths since 1990. 2023 also marked the worst year on record for pedestrian and motorcyclist fatalities in my state. Impaired driving, speeding, distracted driving were the leading causes of these tragedies. So I've worked with communities in my district to raise awareness of our safety challenges and deliver federal funding to improve safety and save lives. In my district, Safe Streets and Roads for All funding will help tribes and other communities, including the Lummi Nation, the Samish Indian Nation, the City of Everett, and the City of Cedar Woolley to plan for and build safer streets. The City of Burlington received a $2 million grant to look at removing a dangerous railroad crossing, and the Stillaguamish tribe has received an $8.5 million award for a crossing project to reduce dangerous interactions with wildlife across Highway 20. Tragically, tribal communities themselves are disproportionately feel the impact of our safety crisis. Native Americans are 7 times more likely to be killed in a motor vehicle crash than other Americans. The BIL doubles the funding for tribal transportation safety for a tribal transportation safety set-aside. If safety is a priority, then we must keep these funding streams going. You can't have a big league economy with little league infrastructure, and it's because this is because these investments support the movement of people and connect them with jobs. And in the case of safety projects, the right investments carried out with accountability and where they are needed most saves lives. It does not get more personal than that. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration estimated that in 2019, traffic crashes cost the economy $340 billion. Across the country, our main streets and downtown areas depend on safe and accessible mobility to support local economies. So when people feel safe to drive, walk, or bike in their communities, they are more active. Investing in safety is then, therefore, an investment in our families, in our communities, and our local economies. And the Safe Streets and Roads for All grants program empowers communities to plan and execute projects to safely improve mobility in ways that reflect local realities. More than 75% of the nation's population will be covered by local safety plans funded by these grants. So Congress has to act and continue to provide the historic investment levels from the BIL with a renewed focus on outcomes so that the communities can turn safety plans into reality, meaning lives saved and livelihoods improved. I'm ready to make that investment. Let's keep it going. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to your testimony. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman I'd now like to welcome our witnesses and thank each of you for being here today. I am going to introduce each of you, but first I'm going to yield to my friend and colleague from Minnesota to introduce Mr. Hanson. Mr. Stauber, if you'd like to introduce Mr. Hanson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this opportunity, and I'm excited to introduce a witness today who hails from the great state of Minnesota, who brought the snow in with him last night. Mr. Mike Hanson is the Director of Minnesota Department of Public Safety's Office of Traffic Safety. He has held this position since November of 2017. In addition to his role as director, Hanson also serves as Minnesota's representative to NHTSA and coordinates Minnesota's participation in NHTSA's state and community safety grant program. He also co-chairs the Minnesota Towards Zero Death program and chairs the Advisory Council on Traffic Safety. In October, Director Hanson was elected to serve as chair of the Governor's Highway Safety Association, the national nonprofit association of state and territorial highway safety offices that addresses behavioral traffic safety issues. He is here testifying on behalf of GHSA today. I am especially proud to have Director Hanson here, Mr. Chair, as he also wore the law enforcement uniform. He served the Minnesota State Patrol for 32 years, retiring as captain. And I often say, even though my time in uniform is over, my watch never ends. Your continued dedication, Mr. Hanson, to safety after your service is a testament that the saying holds true for all those in law enforcement. I look forward to hearing your testimony. Your expertise in safety cannot be overstated. Mr. Chair, one last thing. Mr. Hanson could be anywhere today with his family and friends celebrating his 39th birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. We also have with us the Honorable Jim Willox, Commissioner of Converse County, Wyoming, here on behalf of the National Association of Counties. In addition, we have Ms. Haley Norman, co-owner of Direct Traffic Control Incorporated, here on behalf of the American Traffic Safety Services Association. And I understand that you have two daughters here with you as well, so welcome to them. And last but certainly not least, President of the Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety, Ms. Cathy Chase. Thank you very much for being here. Now, it's pretty simple as we move forward. Mr. Wilcox, I'll recognize you for up to 5 minutes. Pay attention to the light system. Green means go, yellow means wind it down, and red means close it up as soon as you possibly can. Mr. Willox.
Well, thank you, Chair Rouser and Ranking Member Norton, and this opportunity to be before the subcommittee today. My name is Jim Willox, and in my 19th year as a commissioner in Converse County, Wyoming. And today I represent the National Association of Counties, who I serve as a vice chair of the Transportation Committee. NACO is the only national organization that represents all 3,069 counties, parishes, and boroughs in the United States. Counties themselves are very diverse and have a wide range of responsibilities, many of which are delegated to us by the states or the federal government. Counties own or operate 44% of the public roads and 38% of the bridges. In Wyoming, counties own over 14,000 miles of road, and 96% of those are categorized as rural. As major stakeholders, counties recognize that we have an important role to play when it comes to road safety, and we want to do our part to protect American lives. Today, I want to highlight a few challenges that counties, especially rural counties, face in our shared mission to make our roads safer, as well as offer some solutions to help counties improve safety. By working together and relying on our intergovernmental partnerships, I believe there are real opportunities to advance road safety, save lives, and strengthen our communities. First, rural communities have unique challenges and needs when it comes to transportation safety. One of our biggest challenges is that rural communities have limited tax bases, which makes it difficult for us to raise revenue for infrastructure projects. With restricted financial capacity, county officials must often make the hard decision between choosing between a safety project or regular maintenance of another mile of road. Another challenge is that rural communities often rely on non-traditional infrastructure, like one-lane bridges and gravel roads, which present unique safety concerns. In my county, we are larger than the state of Rhode Island, and we have over 500 miles of gravel roads. When it comes to road safety, you may think of rumble strips or center lines, but neither of those are good options on gravel. Instead, gravel roads need dust suppression, longer culverts, and regular blading to avoid washboarding. This is an area where I believe the government can do more to support rural communities by empowering local leaders to implement safety strategies that work for them. We also face challenges implementing road safety due to our nation's broken permitting system. Although the issue impacts urban and suburban areas alike, it is particularly taxing in rural counties, especially out west, given the enormous federal presence. Before counties can begin many infrastructure projects, we must navigate a maze of federal permits. Currently in my county, we want to reduce and grade and pave an existing gravel road, and yet the U.S. Forest Service and BLM are requiring substantial permitting and review, delaying the project for another year. The standard permitting processes under NEPA can be costly, complex, and time-consuming. By streamlining permitting, even by just increasing the categorical exclusions, Congress could enable rural counties to take on more projects with less money. Lastly, I believe the key way to improve road safety is by strengthening county involvement in federal policymaking, like you're doing today. The vast majority of federal transportation funds flow through states. Well, my state of Wyoming does an excellent job of allocating money to our local partners and projects. I know that's not true for all states. Despite owning half the roads and a third of the bridges, counties are not getting their fair share of the funding. Strengthening our intergovernmental partnerships is not just about money. It is about ensuring that counties have a seat at the table to share our local expertise. There's a tremendous opportunity in this upcoming surface transportation bill to hear from leaders at all levels of government, to strengthen our partnership and to protect our communities. Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, I want to close with an anecdote one of my fellow commissioners experiences as a cattle rancher south of Glen Rock, Wyoming. In order for him to get his cattle to market, he must travel across a series of roads. 6 miles of county gravel road, 5 miles of paved county road, 3 miles of a state highway, 68 miles of the interstate, 49 miles of a U.S. highway, finally into a city street to deliver the cattle to market. To ensure road safety, there cannot be a weak link in that network. The interstate can be lined with pillows and mattresses, but if the county roads are unsafe, we have not done enough to keep our road users safe. Please note that counties from across the country are looking to be partners and working hand in hand with our federal and state partners to protect our residents and to strengthen our nation's infrastructure. Mr. Chairman, Madam Ranking Member, thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very, very much. Mr. Hanson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. My name is Michael Hanson, and I am the governor-appointed Highway Safety Representative from Minnesota and the Director of the Minnesota Department of Public Safety's Office of Traffic Safety. I also have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Governor's Highway Safety Association. It's an honor to be testifying before the subcommittee today. I offer my thanks to Subcommittee Chair Rouser, Ranking Member Holmes-Norton, as well as Full Committee Chair Graves and Ranking Member Larson for holding this hearing on such a critically important topic. GHSA is a national nonprofit association representing the state and territorial highway safety offices. The state highway safety offices implement statewide programs to address behavioral highway safety issues and are the recipients of grants under the NHTSA Highway Safety Grant Program. State highway safety offices are all public agencies in all states and territories and are run or overseen by a governor-appointed representative. GHSA's members work to reduce motor vehicle crashes by implementing programs to address the behavioral aspects of highway safety, like speeding, impaired driving, seatbelt use, and distracted driving. Roadway safety is a topic I'm extremely passionate about. Prior to my time serving as the director of the State Highway Safety Office, I proudly served the Minnesota State Patrol for 32 years. During that time, I had direct exposure to the unsafe driving behavior on our roadways and the life-changing and far too often life-ending impacts they can have. Traffic crashes are one of the leading causes of preventable death in the United States. Crashes kill more than 40,000 people every year on our highways. More than 2/3 of those crashes are caused by either an impaired driver or by speeding. Programs that are implemented by the state highway safety offices to address these unsafe driving behaviors are crucial in addressing the increasing roadside fatalities we are seeing. One of the key tools available to address unsafe driving behavior is traffic law enforcement. Over the past several years, due to several factors, including concerns for fair policing practices, reduced public support, and staffing shortages, the amount of traffic enforcement being conducted across the country has significantly decreased. We have seen a corresponding increase in unsafe driving behavior, especially in the areas of impaired driving and speeding. GHSA strongly supports the proven role of traffic enforcement and the wider criminal justice system in preventing crashes and stopping dangerous drivers. Traffic law enforcement holds drivers accountable for poor choices that without intervention can be deadly. By focusing on data-driven unsafe driver behaviors in traffic stops instead of citations for administrative requirements, we can help ensure the traffic stops are fair and address those unsafe driving behaviors. State highway safety officers receive formula and program-specific funding from NHTSA, which are commonly referred to as the Section 402 and 405 grants. In order to participate in these programs, states must submit a highway safety plan every 3 years, an annual grant application, and an annual report. Additionally, states are routinely subject to oversight activities from NHTSA, including comprehensive compliance reviews. State highway safety officers across the country are doing their best to implement meaningful programs to improve driver behavior. We are bogged down by the amount of administrative red tape and limitations on how we can spend funds that we receive from NHTSA. Over the past several years, there has been an increase in this administrative burden associated with these programs. An example of this amount of detail that NHTSA is requiring is the approval for the annual grant application. What was intended to be a brief update to our highway safety plan has ballooned into several hundred pages long documents in order to meet all of the NHTSA requirements, some of which reach lengths of 300 to 500 pages. Across the entire highway safety program, NHTSA's oversight activities have increased significantly. GHSA supports appropriate oversight and recognizes the importance of transparency when using federal funding, but the current level of oversight is burdensome. These programs need to be more efficiently administered by NHTSA so that more of the federal funding can work towards improving safety instead of expending resources demonstrating compliance. As challenges with roadway safety continue, we need to make sure that federal funding is structured in a way that allows for new and innovative ideas like technology deployments, novel data, new safety countermeasures, and more. Congress should look for opportunities to reform the 402 and 405 programs to provide less funding restrictions and more eligibility for states to try new approaches and implement programs that address their unique challenges. In conclusion, state highway safety officers work hard to implement meaningful and effective programs to save lives, but there is room for improving the NHTSA grant programs to better support the states. The Highway Safety Grants Program is hampered by excessive administrative burdens and a lack of flexibility. This diverts valuable resources away from implementing safety programs, streamlining these programs, reducing paperwork, and empowering the states to tailor their initiative to these specific needs. GHSA looks forward to working with the subcommittee as it works to tackle the safety challenges on our roadway and improve the efficiency and effectiveness of federal grant programs. Thank you for the opportunity to address the subcommittee today, and I look forward to your questions.
Ms. Norman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. My name is Haley Norman, and I'm the co-owner of Direct Traffic Control out of Muskogee, Oklahoma. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today about reducing roadway fatalities. Our company is a small family-owned business that currently employs 127 team members across the state of Oklahoma. We make roads safer through the installation of pavement markings, traffic signs, guardrail, and the management of roadway work zones. I am testifying today in my role as the chair-elect of the American Traffic Safety Services Association. ATSA members manufacture, distribute, and install roadway safety infrastructure devices such as guardrail and cable barrier, traffic signs and signals, pavement markings, and work zone safety devices. Reaching zero fatalities remains a very serious challenge. According to the most recent estimate from NHTSA, over 40,000 people died on roadways across the country in 2023, as we've heard numerous times today. Everyone on this committee and on this panel recognizes the severity of the current roadway safety crisis. Collectively, we need to work together to identify actions that will address this crisis, while working to develop new solutions for the future as well. As this committee works on the next surface transportation bill, I wanted to highlight the important programs and areas that contribute directly to saving lives. The Highway Safety Improvement Program is key to achieving the goal of zero deaths and provides dedicated safety funds to each state and DC to address their specific safety needs. And while the IIJA significantly increased funding for HSIP by providing nearly $16 billion, we hope that this program will continue to be a priority in the next highway bill. I have seen firsthand that the projects funded through HSIP have saved the lives of road users across Oklahoma. I believe that any discussion regarding safety must put an emphasis on the men and women that put their lives in harm's way in roadside work zones. I have seen the dangers of that these workers face. I know that many ATSA members have lost a friend or a colleague in a work zone crash. I have watched the dash cam footage of our own workers. Some are my family, and all are my friends, narrowly avoiding being struck in a work zone by a distracted driver. These stories recommit my company and our industry to reach our mission of 0 deaths. As we look to improve roadway safety, we cannot overlook rural and tribal roads. Tragically, while only 20% of Americans live in rural areas, 43% of all roadway fatalities occur on rural roads. American Indian and Alaska Native adults have a traffic fatality rate 7 times higher than any other ethnic group. The IIJA made good inroads in these areas to improve safety. However, we do believe that Congress has more work to do to protect our users of rural and tribal roads. While we know that there are difficulties in administering and implementing discretionary grant programs, the Safe Streets and Roads for All program works to protect vulnerable road users through the deployment and installation of life-saving roadway safety infrastructure devices. The IIJA set a new baseline with historic levels of funding in roadway safety, but many challenges still face our industry. We support the goal of increasing the American manufacturing sector and creating good-paying jobs across the country by expanding the application of Build America, Buy America requirements. However, without a thoughtful approach to implementing the Buy America requirements, this expansion has the potential for catastrophic impacts on the roadway safety infrastructure industry. Small businesses such as my own face price increases, product scarcity, and a mountain of paperwork and certifications. The costs associated with having a small family-owned business are mounting. Inflation has sharply increased the price of products, and therefore the IIJA has not funded as many projects as we had hoped. Frivolous litigation and rapidly rising insurance premiums have also diverted far too many resources away from improving roadway safety. Let me end my statement with a sobering statistic. By the end of this day, over 110 people will have died on our roadways. This is a number that is incredibly tragic and completely unacceptable. And as a safety professional, a business owner, and a mother, I believe that we must all work together to make our roads and communities safe. ATSA members are ready to do what we do best, roll up our sleeves and get to work. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Ms. Chase, you're recognized.
Good morning, Chair Rouser, Ranking Member Norton, Ranking Member Larson, and Subcommittee members. I'm Cathy Chase, President of Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. Advocates is a national alliance of leading property casualty insurance companies and agents and public health, consumer, law enforcement, and safety groups working together to prevent crashes, save lives, reduce injuries, and curb economic costs. Thank you for holding today's hearing on roadway safety at a critical time when motor vehicle fatalities are at historic highs. Nearly 43,000 people were killed and 2.4 million more were injured in 2022. Of particular note, more than 7,500 pedestrians and more than 1,000 bicyclists were killed, representing a 56% and 50% increase, respectively, over the past decade. Additionally, motorcycle riders experienced the highest fatality toll since data collection began in 1975, with more than 6,000 riders being killed. Fatal truck crashes also have been on the rise, increasing by 76% since 2009. Nearly 6,000 people were killed and over 160,000 people were injured in crashes involving large trucks. These are not just statistics. They are family members, friends, and members of communities throughout the country. They include Transportation Secretary Duffy's family and numerous members of Congress. Many victim advocates are joining us today virtually. I want to extend my condolences for their losses and thank them for their perseverance to advance effective solutions to prevent crashes. In addition to the physical and emotional repercussions of crashes, the annual economic cost is approximately $340 billion. Moreover, the Network for Employers for Traffic Safety finds that crashes cost employers more than $72 billion in direct crash-related expenses in 2019. Since Advocate's inception in 1989, we've worked with victim advocates and safety stakeholders to advance a holistic approach to improving traffic safety by focusing on safe vehicles, safe road users, and safe roadway environments. This approach is akin to what is known as the safe system approach, which has the additions of safe speeds and post-crash care, which are also vitally important. Considering today's hearing is focused on roadways, I will discuss steps that can be taken now to improve our streets, roads, and highways. But I'd just like to note that the advances in all three areas go hand in hand and are available and needed. America's roads move an ever-increasing number of people and goods. We all rely on our infrastructure system for household goods supplies to be delivered, for family vacations to be enjoyed, and for our nation's economy to thrive. Unfortunately, our roadways and bridges are in urgent need of improvements and preservation. The American Society of Civil Engineers has given America's roads a grade of D, with 43% in poor or mediocre condition. Not much better, our bridges received a C grade, with 42% being at least 50 years old and more than 46,000 considered structurally deficient. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act authorized upgrades to the Highway Safety Improvement Program that will help to protect vulnerable road users and provides robust funding for the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, or SS4A, to provide direct access to localities to make roadway improvements. These changes promote infrastructure features that consider multimodal use, calm traffic, reduce vehicle speeds, and prevent or mitigate harmful interactions among road users. Infrastructure improvements consistent with the SSA are supported by federal grants, including speed curbing features like speed humps, road diets, and roundabouts. In fact, intersections converted from traffic signals or stop signs to roundabouts have reduced injury crashes up to 80% and cut all crashes by nearly half. Moreover, roundabouts are efficient in keeping travelers moving and can be implemented both in urban and rural areas under a wide range of traffic conditions. We also support the Highway Safety Program Section 402 and National Priority Safety Program Section 405 grants. As with all federal safety grants, it is critical that these programs include clear and transparent measures for success to ensure funds are spent as intended and result in actual safety benefits and improvements. As was stated, before the end of today, 116 Americans will be killed on our roadways. That equals more than all the people in this room about right now. We can and must implement proven solutions to improve our roadways and make them safer for all. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I now ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. And then I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. So I want to thank each of our panelists for being here today. Your testimony is very good. And we now turn to questions for the panel. So I will recognize myself for up to 5 minutes. Now, I'm going to come at this from a little bit different angle than many of my colleagues may, just because of some specific experience I had when I was in the state legislature. I get elected to the state senate in 2008, and at that time, in my home county of Johnston County, North Carolina, and other surrounding counties, particularly in the rural areas, but my home county in particular, for whatever reason, there was a death almost a week, if not a week, every 2 weeks. It was one of those things where every time you turned on the news, a young person was killed in a traffic fatality. And in the more rural areas, you have narrower roads, straight, very straight roads in some places, and then, a quick turn. And what we found was that there were a lot of young people as in teenagers, those who were in their 20s, and those who are older too, that when they would run off the road, they didn't know how to correct. They didn't know how to get back on. They would overcorrect, and the tire would grab, and the next thing they knew, we had a traffic fatality. And so there was a big effort in the legislature to address that issue because it had become so prolific. And what we ended up doing was basically enhancing driver's education, specifically encouraging, incentivizing parents to travel more, with their children as they learn how to drive. So if you were going to get your license at age 16, at age 15 with your learner's permit, a big part of the requirement was experience behind the wheel that your parents or guardian or whoever was with you would document as part of a log. And that translated into saving lives. It worked. So my question is, of the fatalities we have out there, how did the demographics break down? Is it universal, or are we having in these rural areas like we had in North Carolina, where it was mostly younger people that were overcorrecting? I'm just curious your experience on that front and recommendations that aren't necessarily roads and bridges, but driver education related. Anybody?
I'd be glad to try to answer that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have the specific statistics about the breakdown that you asked, but I'd be glad to get that to you. I don't want to misrepresent, but I appreciate greatly what you said about graduated driver licensing. We work in state legislatures throughout the country to make sure that young people whose brains are not formed yet, I have 2 younger drivers myself, and it's terrifying as a parent when you hand those keys over. So what you mentioned about graduated driver licensing, or GDL, is essential, and we urge all state legislatures to enhance them. We put out a report every year called the Roadmap to Safety, and in our report, no state has an optimal GDL law, so there are improvements needed in every state legislature.
Mr. Hanson.
Mr. Chair and members, in the demographic question, I think, some things haven't changed. Young males are still highly overrepresented, especially in those rural rollover fatalities, especially young males driving pickup trucks. And so education and outreaches absolutely have to be part of that solution. Infrastructure, especially on our unpaved roadways, is a little bit tougher challenge to overcome. So when we address those driver behavior issues through education and through outreach and through training, that is going to be the thing that will provide the benefit and save those rural lives.
Thank you. Mr. Willox?
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a commissioner, we don't deal a lot with the driver behavior. We're trying to deal with the road. And as I mentioned, washboards, if you are on rural roads, that's one of the dangers you have when you get that, you lose traction. So we try to address that as best we can. The slopes of the gravel roads, reduce those. So if they do go off the road, we reduce the chance for overcorrection. But here's the challenge, is many of those rural roads have an average daily traffic of 15. So how much, when you're making the financial considerations of where to spend your dollars in a rural community, how much effort can you spend on a road that has low volume but a high risk versus a road that's got a lot of volume and a less of a risk? So those are the challenges we face all the time. Try to do it as we go along, but dealing with the slopes and the washboards are things we try to deal with on the gravel roads that help if they get into a bad situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Ms. Norman, real quickly, I only have about 18 seconds left, but do you have some specifics as it relates to work zones? I-95 cutting through North Carolina, for example, I think that we've been working on that, since the beginning of time. It never ends, work zones.
Yeah, thank you for that good question. And I think in regards to work zones specifically, there is some new teen driver training specifically for work zone, which is not in current driver education. And that is really picking up, especially in Oklahoma. It is actually now a law that they take a course to get their driver's license that is specific to work zones. And so ATS is happy to share that information as well and get that into other states.
That'd be great. I yield back. Ms. Norton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Chase, in 2023, 40,990 people were killed on public roads. That is 8,096 more deaths than in 2013, despite hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer investment to maintain and improve our transportation system. Why is it important to ensure that federal transportation safety dollars are used for their intended purpose?
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member. It's vital that federal dollars are spent for the precise reason that you just shared. Our country is experiencing a public health crisis on our roadways, and without federal dollars to improve the roadway environments, as well as improvements to vehicles themselves. In your opening statement, you mentioned the new automatic emergency braking rule. We have worked to get that over the finish line for over a decade, because we know that it will address distracted driving, impaired driving, drowsy driving. If a driver doesn't brake, the car will slow down and brake for them. So we need to have a holistic answer, and we need federal dollars in order to finance it.
Thank you. Ms. Chase, bicyclists and pedestrians suffer disproportionately from highway fatalities on our roads. To combat the vulnerable road user safety crisis, the BIL created the Vulnerable Road User Special Rule. The rule requires a state to direct 15% of its Highway Safety Improvement Program funding to vulnerable road user safety projects if bicyclists and pedestrians make up at least 15% of the state's traffic fatalities. Why does it make sense to dedicate highway safety funding for projects that address ongoing safety challenges facing vulnerable road users?
Thank you for the question. Vulnerable road users lack the protections that motorists have, basically a car surrounding them. So they're at particular risk in terms of roadway safety. I think that program that allocates a certain percentage toward vulnerable road user safety makes sense, because you're addressing a known problem. Oftentimes, we don't pay attention to the problem at hand, but everything that is decided should be based on statistics and facts. And that's why it's so important to address vulnerable road user safety, which we know have been increasing by over 50% over the last decade.
Thank you. Mr. Hanson and Ms. Chase, currently manufacturers and operators of vehicles equipped with automatic driving systems are required to submit crash data to NHTSA. However, they are not required to report so-called close call incidents where vehicles break traffic rules or operate unsafely but do not crash. Recently, NHTSA published its AV STEP proposed rulemaking, which would create a voluntary oversight program for self-driving cars. What are ways to increase accountability for autonomous vehicles on our roadways? Ms. Chase and Mr. Hanson.
Mr. Chair and members, a very good question, and thank you for that. Really, what it's going to come down to is those near misses, and the technology is emerging for us to track that type of behavior using telematics and a variety of other technologies that are out there. And so the better that we can track that, and the better that we can work with the manufacturers in order to harvest that data, it will identify the countermeasures that we can deploy in order to prevent the types of behaviors or the types of activity that you're describing from taking place in the first place. So it's going to be a combined effort between, I think, the OEMs as well as NHTSA, as well as the states, to begin to track some of this novel data and some of the telematic data that is available out there.
Ms. Chase?
I agree with Mr. Hanson in that data collection is essential in order to make proper decisions. A number of years ago, when Congress started deliberating about an autonomous vehicle bill, we came up with a document called the AV Tenets, and it provided a blueprint on how autonomous vehicles could be achieved safely. We are not pro or against autonomous vehicles. We just want them to be done in a deliberate and thoughtful way. Our AV tenets have a number of high-level recommendations, including prioritizing safety for all road users, which includes safety rulemakings and safety and performance data collection, guaranteeing accessibility for all, preserving consumer and worker rights, and ensuring local control and sustainable transportation. These are all promises that are being made by autonomous vehicle manufacturers, so we want to help make sure that all of the promises being offered are achieved.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Stauber.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Before I begin, Mr. Wilcox, Brittany Butler says hi. She works for me now, and she's had a great time working with you, so I wanted to share that with you. Mr. Hanson, Director Hanson, NHTSA put out the results of a national survey on driver knowledge of school bus passing laws in November. Participants were asked for their opinions on the reason most drivers illegally pass a stopped school bus. 12.2% said they were distracted, 25% said they were in a hurry, 24.3% said they didn't know it was illegal to pass a school bus, and 30.5% said they didn't care. Those last two statistics are what startles me the most. 55% of the drivers in the survey either didn't care or didn't know. Director Hanson, can you speak to the dangers of illegal school bus passings?
Mr. Chair and members, absolutely. This is a critical challenge for all of us in the traffic safety world. Our most precious cargo are those kids getting on and off of those school buses. And it is something we have to face. Education and outreach are certainly going to be some of the most effective tools that we can deploy so we can reach those drivers who don't know what the law is. But along with that, we also have to be able to have the method and the tools to hold drivers accountable when they don't care, because quite honestly, that is just not acceptable. In Minnesota, over the last 2 years, we've taken about $16 million worth of state-provided funding, and we have created a grant program for our transportation providers to equip our school buses with stop-arm camera systems so that we can track those drivers and we can take that enforcement action that they seriously need to be part of. To date, there's about 12,000 yellow buses in Minnesota that would qualify for that. We've equipped over 8,000 of them with a camera system, and talking with my law enforcement partners across the state and with the transportation providers, it's a much, much more effective way to document those violations and hold those drivers accountable. So education, outreach, enforcement, that is the key, sir.
The education outreach piece goes to my next question. Would you support a public service announcement like the Click It or Ticket campaign in the 90s for wearing seatbelts?
Absolutely. The more we can keep these types of topics in the forefront of the public, the more they pay attention to it, and the more likely we are to obtain that voluntary compliance, which, again, that lessens the need for that enforcement and so forth, but it increases the knowledge and the ability of drivers to know what the law is and what they have to do to comply with that.
I can tell you I'm passionate about this, and I'm going to work with you on working to get PSA announcements on the airwaves to make sure that the educational component is there. You said, you mentioned it's our most precious cargo, and we have to protect it. I want to change gears. Director Hanson, we have seen a decrease in traffic enforcement across the country. Has that had an impact on safety?
Mr. Chair and members, the data is irrefutable. The decrease in traffic law enforcement that has occurred over the last 5, 6, 7 years across the country has led to significant increases in the bad driving behavior that we are seeing out there. And so traffic law enforcement is the one thing that we can take off the shelf as a State Highway Safety Office. We can put it to work right now, and it will have an effect on driver behavior. Now, again, it has to be implemented in the right place at the right time for the right reason in the right way in order for that to be effective. But, you know, there are examples all over the country where traffic law enforcement has decreased. You know, the D.C. area, you know, the number of impaired driving arrests over the last several years has decreased significantly, but yet the number of impaired driving fatalities has increased almost diametrically to that number. And they're just example after example after example, talking to my partners across the country, where that decrease in that enforcement presence has led to the increase in bad driving behavior. Minnesota, the number of drivers who are apprehended for driving more than 100 miles an hour is roughly triple what it was pre-pandemic. And so we have to employ these tools in an effective way.
Thank you very much. Last question. EMS and post-crash care aren't talked about as frequently as tactics to reduce crash fatalities. Can you share more about why you think it is an important element of roadway safety?
Mr. Chair and members, and again, thank you for a great question. EMS services, kind of the fourth E of the Towards Zero Death concept, and that's post-crash care. Over 40% of people who are killed in a motor vehicle crash are alive when EMS arrives on the scene. We need to find better ways to provide timely care and get them to a proper facility in order to improve that survival rate. Even a small improvement there is going to pay huge dividends for the number of fatalities that are taking place across the country. In Minnesota, we're working with advanced technology and advanced data analysis tools in order to identify ideal positioning for our EMS responders based on crash history as well as real-time data so that we can cut down that response time, get those services to the scene quickly, and get those patients to the hospital quickly. Whole blood.
I'm running out of time, Mr. Hanson. I wish we'd have more time. Thank you for your service. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Larson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Chase, your testimony notes a crash tax, which I think your term, which is the annual economic cost of the physical and emotional damage caused by motor vehicle crashes. Can you elaborate, therefore, on why federal safety investments are critical not only to saving lives, but helping communities grow and prosper?
In terms of federal safety grants, sir? Is that what you said? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
In terms of federal safety investments?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of federal safety investments, as we're talking today about roadway investments are crucial. If you don't have the safe roadway environments, then vehicles will not perform as needed and expected. Additionally, the 402 and 405 grants, which help to enhance, which help to address behavioral issues and which also encourage stronger state laws, are essential in order to make all of the roads in our country safer.
On that point, Mr. Hanson, I have a question for you with regards to the whether roadway safety overall is a federal interest or not. Is it a federal interest that a road in my district be built safely versus one in your district, or should we rely strictly on local governments to take care of that?
I think the answer, if I understood the question, sir, is, they're both equally important. And rural road safety is certainly something we need to focus on. And the infrastructure part of this and the behavior part of what's happening on our roads absolutely has to intersect in a meaningful way. So infrastructure affects driver behavior, but driver behavior can overcome infrastructure occasionally. And so I think it is a federal priority to ensure that we have the same level of safe design and safe implementation across the country.
Yeah, thanks. Ms. Norman, sorry, I misplaced my glasses this morning. So, Ms. Norman, I note that in your testimony you said you're a Muskogee Creek Nation citizen as well, and your testimony covers travel road safety. I have a district that includes 8 federally recognized tribes as well. Members all over this committee as well have the honor and privilege to serve with tribal citizens. Can you talk a little bit more, based on your testimony, how important a tribal transportation safety program is, just so they have it in the record?
Yes, thank you so much for that. We are so thankful for the continued focus on tribal road safety, and the increase in both the tribal transportation program and the safety set-aside of that program were great steps forward. As a result, my company, as I mentioned in my statement, has worked on projects on tribal lands to install pavement markings, guardrail, signage, and rumble strips in an effort to make those roads safer. I drive those roads myself every day with my kids, and those things are vitally important. As mentioned earlier, a lot of those rural roads and tribal roads can be more narrow and have, other issues that we don't see in other places. And so I would ask that Congress continues to invest in safety on our tribal roads and ensure that the safety funds can get directly into the hands of those communities that need them.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Mr. Wilcox, I'm very thankful that when we put these panels together, the minority gets one witness, the majority gets the majority of the witnesses. And yet, we have a panel that largely agrees, regardless of who asked them to be here, which is really great to hear. And I think that's been a theme of the America Builds hearings that we've had as well, broad consensus on both sides of the aisle to craft a bill in the future that we can all agree on. Very pleased as well, as a former county elected official, to hear from you how important the counties think it is for the federal programs to provide money to counties directly and not necessarily through the states. It must be W states. In Washington state, we also have a very set way of the state legislature taking the federal dollars and allocating to cities and counties as well. Not every state does that. Wyoming sounds like it does that as well. Perhaps West Virginia's in that boat too. But I just wanted to ask you to underscore the role the counties play again and how important it is for you to have that direct relationship with federal funding sources.
Thank you, Representative. Yeah, the path is, it's a system. And as I said in my statement, the whole system has to work. So county roads are a vital part of that. You have both pass-through and grants. And I think the thing that we need to keep in mind is the pass-through at times for rural counties can be such a small amount of money they can't do some projects. So we also need to have the grants available so that you can apply for the bigger projects. $100,000 to a small county is a fifth of a blade. Blades are $500,000 now, whereas they might have $1 million project they could apply through grants. So it's a balancing act that is that's tricky, but is also vital for small rural communities and that balance at the federal level. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you,
Mr. Nails.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Despite billions in funding for roadway and safety programs, traffic fatalities remain above pre-pandemic levels. DOJ and the work Elon Musk and his team are doing to expose the waste, the fraud, and just government fat of these agencies. Programs that merely exist because no one in Congress has objectively looked at them and asked, is this worth federal taxpayer monies? I think it's key to highlight federal taxpayer monies. A lot of programs that have good intentions. If people in their state or local municipalities want to invest in PR campaigns, then I think that's great. Go for it. However, I question if it's the most effective use of taxpayer monies. Can we provide concrete evidence that NHTSA's behavioral safety programs, like the high visibility enforcement, public awareness campaigns, have directly reduced crashes and not just increased awareness? Increasing awareness is fine, but it should be temporary. Are Section 402 or 405 programs improving roadway safety? Or are the relics of previous attempts to just do something? I mean, are we really reducing drunk driving with the drive sober or get pulled over? Are we reducing it? I don't think so. NHTSA's website, look it up. I just looked it up. 13,000 lives last year. Drunk driving deaths last December, the highest in 15 years. Ms. Chase, you said it. You said a few minutes ago, everything should be decided by statistics and facts. I believe some of NHTSA's safety programs do not improve safety, and the statistics and the facts support my conclusion. We have a $36 trillion debt. We need to start thinking about cutting these programs and the career bureaucrats who do this work. It needs to be either private money or at the state and local level. With that, I yield.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this hearing. It's a critical hearing when we're talking about lives lost on American highways. In fact, 400,000 lives lost on American roads in the past decade. That means 400,000 empty dinner table chairs, 400,000 missed birthdays, 400,000 futures that have been snuffed out. And these aren't just numbers, it's real lives torn apart by preventable tragedies. This is devastating. And the bipartisan infrastructure law recognized the need for safer roads and invested more than $38 billion in safety projects. Thanks to these efforts, we've seen a decline in traffic fatalities. That progress is now being recklessly jeopardized. The U.S. Department of Transportation's recent memo prioritizing funding for safety based on birth and marriage rates represents a dangerous diversion of resources away from critical safety initiatives and proven technologies that save lives. If we lose sight of this, the tragedy of more lives lost will continue to devastate communities across the nation. Federal investment should never be tied to factors like birth rates and marital status. Our priority must be protecting lives, and that means investing in the safety of every person who uses our roads, no matter where they come from or who they are. Ms. Chase, you ended your testimony with a compelling message that everyone in the United States moves on our roadways, whether as a driver, passenger, pedestrian, cyclist, worker, and that everyone deserves a safe trip. Our goal in Congress should be to ensure that no one's safety is at risk simply because of where they live, how they travel, or their economic background. However, in a recent Department of Transportation memo outlining policies for DOT grants, loans, contracts, and federally supported or assisted state contracts, the department stated it would, quote, give preference to communities with marriage and birth rates higher than the national average, end quote. Ms. Chase, can federal investment based on birth rates and marital status truly meet the safety needs of everyone? And how does federal investment based on birth rates and marital status inherently prioritize some over others?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Johnson. Safety has been and always will be a nonpartisan, non-political issue. We have always strived to work on both sides of the aisle to advance safety improvements, starting with airbags and seatbelts, electronic stability control, and most recently, as was mentioned, automatic emergency braking. These systems protect all road users and should not be in a political tangle. So,
So when we start creating prerequisites like birth rates and marriage rates and giving preference to communities with above average, higher birth and marriage rates, how does that disfavor other communities? And should that prerequisite trump health and safety for all?
Advocates has always proceeded in a way that we base our recommendations on safety on facts and figures, as I stated. So that is irrelevant to...
Are birth?
No.
Those are not legitimate factors.
Those are not what we have based our policies on.
All right, thank you. I particularly appreciated the conclusion of your testimony where you highlighted the importance of data-driven solutions for improving roadway safety through infrastructure improvements. This approach has proven effective in preventing fatalities and injuries while ensuring more efficient roads. Is there any data or evidence that shows that prioritizing funding based on birth and marriage rates will actually reduce traffic fatalities and injuries?
Not that I'm aware of.
So why would we apply such a prerequisite to future funding? Is it just simply political?
Sir, it's not a question that I can answer since I didn't make the determination.
I think it's clear what the motivation would be. Now, we know that traffic fatalities disproportionately affect certain communities, and investing federal dollars into infrastructure that protects vulnerable road users has clear benefits, especially for disadvantaged communities. These disparities are a matter of life and death. How can a funding model that fails to prioritize safety outcomes exacerbate the risks faced by already vulnerable communities, potentially leading to a rise in traffic-related fatalities and injuries?
Is that addressed to me again, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we should always base our determinations on how to improve safety based on what's happening on the roadways. So if there are communities that are suffering disproportionately, then solutions, effective solutions with transparency and accountability should be employed.
All right, thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hanson, I once had a mentor who told me that hope is not a business plan. I would also say it's not a good technology development plan. In your testimony, you noted that the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act requires NHTSA to complete rulemaking for advanced impaired driving technology, AKA automotive kill switch, by November of last year, a deadline that the agency has not met. I made a prediction in front of this committee, and I'm going to make it again today, that this won't be ready by 2026. Congress has asked the impossible. It's a wish. It's not a plan. Are you aware that Ann Carlson, the former acting administrator of NHTSA, sat in front of this subcommittee and said, "I think it's safe to say that we do not think they are available yet in a way that actually will achieve the goals both of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Vehicle Safety Act." Did you hear her make that comment?
Mr. Chair, members, I don't remember that specific comment, sir.
So are you aware that the technology that you are advocating for in your testimony does not exist?
NHTSA released their early rulemaking process in March of 2024. There was a deadline in late 2024 for them to have a proposal ready to go, and that has gone by or expired. NHTSA has also been working with the DDADS program since about 2008, which is the early precursor for the HALT Act, or that the technology in car that would prevent an impaired driver from operating that vehicle. My understanding is that that DDADS project is now ready to go and could be implemented in 2025. And the OEMs have been involved in the development of that.
Well, before airbags were mandated and before seat belts were mandated, they both existed in commercial vehicles for over a decade. Does this technology exist in any commercial vehicle presently?
I'm not aware of it being, Mr. Chair, members, I'm not aware of it being available or mandated in any vehicle type now, but I would compare it to ignition interlock. That type of technology is there in one shape, form, or another.
Well, the difference between the ignition interlock and this technology you're advocating for is the one you're advocating for is science fiction presently. It doesn't exist in any vehicle. It's never been implemented. And there's a mandate by the government to have it in every new vehicle within 2 years. It's just not practical. What's more is if you did try to implement it, there would be false positives. So what we're talking about here is a kill switch in an automobile that would monitor the driving of a vehicle and then stop the vehicle from operating if the car itself decides that the operator is not driving safely. Let's say a mother is driving a vehicle, taking her kids to work, and how does she appeal her conviction of a disabled minivan from the side of a road? How would you re-enable a car that's been disabled with this technology you're advocating for?
It's a good question, sir, Mr. Chair, members. Good question, and I'm not quite sure that I'm qualified to provide the technical answer that you're looking for there. I do understand that the technology is very near to being developed that would allow for a passive type of system that would detect when a driver has an alcohol concentration above a predetermined level, and that would not allow the vehicle to be operated.
Well, the problem with the technology is it's not looking for alcohol levels. You can monitor blood alcohol levels, at least if somebody's breathing into something. That's not what this technology promises to do. In fact, it says it's going to passively monitor driver performance. What does that mean?
Mr. Chair and members, my understanding is that it doesn't require any active participation by the driver. like an ignition interlock system would. It simply is a system that exists within the vehicle platform that would detect when a driver has a predetermined alcohol concentration or is above that predetermined alcohol concentration. So this is primarily focusing on preventing an impaired driving incident from happening before it does.
The specification hopes to do that, but the technology does not exist. It simply doesn't exist. And what's more is if it did exist, there's some cost associated with developing it. Maybe an autonomous vehicle could perform this, but what does an autonomous vehicle cost? And whenever we're looking at safety, as an engineer, what you need to look at is where's your bang for the buck? If this system, assuming it could exist, costs $5,000, you can't simply mandate it and say you're going to improve safety because the price of the vehicle can't go up $5,000. You're going to compromise somewhere else, maybe less metal in the frame or something. So I think it's foolhardy for you to sit here and testify that we need to have this technology available on this timeline because it simply does not exist. We don't know the cost. We don't know how it works. And there would be false positives that could put the public at danger. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member, and to all of our panelists this morning. Commissioner Willox, in a region as large and complex as Chicago, addressing transportation safety can't be done one town at a time. It takes a coordinated regional strategy. That's why the Safe Travel for All roadmap prepared by the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning is so important. This region-wide initiative is bringing together 6 counties to identify high-risk roads, upgrade infrastructure, and make streets safer for everyone. By creating safety action plans in each county, our region is laying the groundwork for critical investments that will make our roads safer for all users. My question to you, sir, is as we work on the next reauthorization, how should Congress help regional governments more directly access safety funding so that they can implement these plans and move projects forward more quickly?
Thank you, Representative. I think the key is not to make the box too small. What works in Chicago does not work the same in a regional authority in Wyoming. So make sure there's flexibility built in so that what works in that local area can be best implemented and provide those opportunities. Some of the regional transportation in our part of the world, it's a little larger area. I mentioned my county's larger than Rhode Island, so there's some geographic challenges that happen there as well. But when you create that, continue to work with that, it makes sure that the restrictions aren't so tight that what works for Chicago doesn't necessarily work in a rural area.
Thank you, Mr. Willox. Switching gears a little bit, it's clear to me that grants play an important role in making communities safer. Programs like Safe Streets and Roads for All help implement projects to prevent deaths and serious injuries on our roadways. In Chicago, we know the corridors with the highest incidence of crashes thanks to the state's Vulnerable Road User Safety Assessment. Many of these corridors are, of course, in my district. Ms. Chase, I'm going to ask you to comment and to answer a question. We know that Indigenous, Black, and Hispanic populations all experience pedestrian and bicycle fatalities at higher rates, up to 3 times more frequently than the general population. We cannot effectively address the issue of traffic safety without accounting for these inequities. That's another reason why the bipartisan infrastructure law programs like Safe Streets for All and transportation alternatives are so important. The benefits of investing federal dollars into infrastructure that protects vulnerable road users are reaped, especially by disadvantaged communities. As this committee considers new investments in traffic safety, how can we ensure that those dollars reach communities most impacted by this crisis? And that's a question for Ms. Chase.
Thank you for the question. I think it's essential that when we're looking at the next reauthorization bill, that we take a good look at what is happening on our roadways and make determinations to address the problems. We know that some of the leading crash contributors are drunk driving, speeding, not wearing your seatbelt, and distracted driving. And yet, we have proven solutions to address all of those that aren't being used effectively. And that's what needs to happen. And I'm looking forward to working with the members of this committee, as we did at the last reauthorization, to try to advance these safety improvements.
And will you be advancing proposals to the committee for our consideration as we look at reauthorization?
Absolutely, sir.
Great, looking forward to it. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
and I
me too.
yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Weed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As always, I'd like to extend my thanks to our witnesses for appearing before us today to discuss the safety on our nation's roadways. Whether it's motorists, pedestrians, or cyclists, the safety of everyone who uses our roads must be a top priority. Every person deserves to travel safely, whether they're driving to work, walking to school, or biking through their neighborhood, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to make this a reality. In my home state, teens are required, and it's free for them, to complete a 30-minute work zone safety instruction as a requirement to obtain their license. After completing the course, they will know what causes most work zone crashes and the basic driving safety habits that can prevent injuries and fatalities. The course also introduces teens to powerful real-life stories of the faces behind the flags, cones, and flashing lights, which are too often overlooked by many drivers. Ms. Norman, I'd like to direct my first question to you. What can this committee do to support state efforts like this on work zone safety?
Thank you so much for that great question. It's a wonderful program that's happening in several states. And this committee can continue to invest in the roads, in safety. We are, at ATSA, we are very confident that there is a lot that can be done as far as behavior goes, but that we also need to remain focused on what happens when we can't control behavior. And so I am thankful for that program, and I think that one thing that can be done federally is awareness and communication between states on best practices. I believe that we will see that that type of program is effective and should be shared across states. So thank you for mentioning that.
So that program is currently only offered, and again, it's free, it's privately funded in Oklahoma and Wisconsin. Do we know, I mean, is there stats that show that it is effective?
I do not have that information at this time, and I do know that it is a newer program, so it may take some time for that to come out, but would be glad to follow up on that afterwards.
Okay, great. Obviously, having stuff, programs like that are privately funded are definitely things that we need to look into, and of course, raise that awareness, like you said, to other states, and perhaps, I mean, I can't imagine it's not effective.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Yeah, and it's, in Oklahoma, we have seen a lot of our contractors and our road builders come together and be the ones that support that, and it is very important. We want to keep our workers safe.
It's great to see private industry getting involved, and certainly that's very important for our safety and for our children and for the workers. So, Mr. Wilcox, you mentioned that Converse County is a commodity-based economy that's reliant on oil and gas, and making heavy trucks, I'm sure, a common sight on your roads. What investment is needed, in your opinion, and for rural roadways to ensure trucks hauling essential goods can continue to operate safely in rural environments? And I say this because we are a very large logging, forestry district in northeast Wisconsin, the Green Bay area, and of course agriculture. But would really like your input on that.
Well, thank you, Representative. Oil and gas is a big part of our county, and those heavy trucks, what I want is legal heavy trucks. They are hard on our roads. I talked a little bit about dust suppression, and they kick up a lot of dust. So one of the things I'm advocating for is allowing dust suppression to actually be a safety control. Right now, it's an environmental control, but if you have a big truck that goes past, it creates dust, that's a challenge. They're harder on our roads, so we have to do maintenance. They're providing revenue, so it's a trade-off. But you want to make sure that the education, many times when you have that industry particularly, they are non-residents of our state and our county, so they're learning the roads as they drive. So education and signage is a big thing, so we're using signage and temporary speed limit trailers, if you will. Safe Streets for All that was mentioned is we're actually going to use some of those portable signs that slow the trucks down. So we have a maintenance issue, and then we don't want them to get heavier than legal limits, because then that's a real challenge for our bridges and regular maintenance.
All right, thank you again, witnesses, and I yield back.
Ms. Sykes?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, for holding this hearing today. This is a great conversation and certainly very timely. As you know, we'll be working on the Surface Transportation Authorization, and safety is always a good day to talk about safety. Thanks to the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law in 2021, communities from coast to coast will continue to see over $1.2 trillion in local investments to improve the reliability, resilience, and efficiency of Americans' infrastructure over the next 10 years. Americans are already seeing tangible differences, including improved roads, bridges, transit systems, airports, waterways, and environmental infrastructure. One of the programs that many Midwestern states and localities have taken advantage of is the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program, which provides funds to improve the mobility and safety of highway, rail, and pathway rail grade crossings. Anyone who has lived near a rail crossing, as I do, understands the inconvenience and dangers that railroad crossings pose to local drivers, bikers, and pedestrians, as well as for the rail workers and the staff and those who staff trains. But these crossings don't just pose threats to people passing through, they're also cumbersome for the communities around them, as they're very costly to improve or remove. This means that the federal dollars coming in to address these issues with rail crossings are invaluable resources for communities like mine in Akron and throughout the district. Since last month, the Federal Railroad Administration has invested $48 billion of funding for more than 445 rail projects, creating safer communities for the millions of Americans living around them. In Ohio, these funds are desperately needed. While the number of train vehicle crashes at public highway rail grade crossings isn't as high as it was in 2001, when there were 123 crashes, the recent jump from 62 to 77 is certainly a cause for concern. And I know we're not talking about rail, but I can't not help talk about rail. There was a train derailment today in Ohio, so it's always timely. But I'm going to turn our attention to Ohio's 13th district. I was thrilled to see that the Ohio Rail Development Commission awarded $13 million of Railroad Crossing Elimination Program funding from the federal government with pass-through funds to remove existing rail crossings and build a grade separation in the city of Hudson, which has consistently had issues. And while this project will likely bring more orange barrels to the streets of Hudson, it's certainly important to remember that these orange barrels mean jobs and opportunities for folks in Ohio. Mr. Chase, I want to ask you a question. We know that safety alone is a reason enough to, Ms. Chase, excuse me, to invest in our communities, but could you also speak to the economic benefits of safe roadways?
The economic investment of safe roadways, you said?
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing today, my apologies. Yes, we know that crashes cost our economy $340 billion every year, and any investment in both the roadways and vehicles and in safe road users will pay off. As I was stated in my written testimony, this amounts to a crash tax, if you will, of about $1,000 on each American. So clearly, with that combination and the mounting death and injury toll, we can and must do better to make our roadways safer for all road users. And as I mentioned earlier, we have proven solutions. So it's not like we're curing cancer. We know how to make our roadways safer. We need our leaders and our safety stakeholders to implement proven answers.
Thank you so much for your response there. In December of last year, the Akron Metropolitan Area Transportation Study, also known as AMATS, released its latest analysis identifying the region's most dangerous intersections for both pedestrians and motorists. 222 bicycle-related crashes occurred in 2021, and 2022 and 2023. 204 of them resulted in injury and 2 of them in a fatality. There are 428 pedestrian-related crashes in the same time period, with 89% of them resulting in injury and 31 of them in a fatality. Cars are heavier and larger, and much of the infrastructure does not consider pedestrians or people walking or biking. And to address this issue, I worked with Congressman Carey to introduce Save Our Pedestrians Act, which requires states to set aside federal funds to make our roads safer for everyone, from pedestrians to motorists. Unfortunately, we continue to see a freeze to federal funds, particularly for transportation projects that are particularly important. And I see I'm running out of time, and I'm not going to get to my next question. But Mr. Chair, and to the members of the committee, thank you so much for your consistent approach to safety and the work that you do. We look forward to working with you in this Congress.
I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Bresnahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this conversation because before I became a member of Congress last month, I was a heavy highway electrical contractor and was a certified PennDOT flagger. So I've seen the risk, inherent dangers of being a contractor. I've been on the road with our crews. We specifically focused on traffic signals and smart electrical infrastructure, CCTV, cashless tolling systems. And every single day that we would do job safety analysis, the first thing every day would be the uncontrollability of traffic on a roadway. And my first question would be for Ms. Norman. This is what you do through crash trucks, attenuator trucks. How have you seen the technology of the attenuator truck, and have you seen or have had any firsthand experience where an attenuator truck did exactly what it was supposed to do?
Yes, thank you for that question. I have multiple stories. I would not be able to count the number exactly, where every single time the attenuator truck has done what it was supposed to do. Both the driver that impacted the vehicle and our driver who was driving that impact attenuator walked away from the accidents with no injuries. So.
What I think is really interesting is an attenuator truck, in the slang term, is a crash truck. And something that PennDOT requires is somebody to occupy the actual crash truck. We were a part of the Autonomous Vehicle Coalition many moons ago, and actually our company installed the first connected autonomous vehicle system in the city of Harrisburg. Something that we were working on with the committee was utilizing autonomous vehicles relevant to the attenuator truck, where there'd be a chase car and the truck would move through the work zone. So you did not have literally a sitting duck inside of one of these attenuator trucks. Is there anything that we can do in Congress to cauterize or solidify interpretations relating to autonomous vehicles, specifically inside of work zones?
Thank you for that great question as well. I don't have the technical experience, I believe, to answer that question, but I do know that ATSA is very actively engaged with that AV conversation, and we would be glad to connect on that as we have been, working on the autonomous vehicles, specifically with the crash attenuators.
I think we're going to be moving in a world where there's going to be more and more autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles, and specifically inside of work zones. I mean, whether it's a GM technology or a Tesla technology, we have to remember that they're still computers and they still take away the fact of the human decision, situational awareness. Ms. Chase, you had testified earlier, relevant to the autonomous vehicles and where the industry is heading. Is there, any potential downsides of having more autonomous vehicles on the road that you see?
Well, I think the potential downsides, and again, I just want to reiterate it, that Advocates is not pro or against autonomous vehicles. We just want to see that it's done safely. And we believe that the downsides are if they're put on the roads before there are proper safeguards, that it could endanger the unknowing public. People don't necessarily know if they're next to an autonomous car if it's not obvious from the outside. And I think that as technology progresses, that will probably be even more likely. So I think now is the perfect time for our nation to consider what our policy should be so that it's deliberate and safe.
I appreciate this. My last question is for Mr. Hanson and Ms. Chase, relevant to safety-sensitive positions and marijuana specifically relating to these. I think at a prior hearing, we talked about, the fact that alcohol has the ability to detect instantaneous impairment. Obviously, when you are driving an 80,000-pound vehicle over the road, do you have any recommendations for Congress and also with states getting out in front of federal legislation relating to marijuana specifically? Do you have any recommendations or ideas or technologies that we can start to implement that would detect a more instantaneous level of impairment?
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, members, I think the first and foremost thing that is going to assist us in preventing those tragedies from taking place is oral fluid roadside testing. We can deploy instruments and technology in the field that allows a law enforcement officer to detect recent use of a cannabis product that is a strong indicator that that person may be impaired. So putting those tools in the hands of law enforcement to prevent that from happening or allow them to process somebody who may be impaired is going to be important.
Thank you. I think we're out of time, but I yield back and happy belated birthday.
I look forward to working with you on the issue, sir.
All you have to do is sit on 14th Street Bridge and you can smell all of it. Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wilcox, the condition of our roads and bridges is a critical component of roadway safety. However, according to the Federal Highway Administration, over 42,000 bridges are rated as poor, including over 1,600 in my home state of New York. Furthermore, the 2016 U.S. DOT truck size and weight study found that thousands of interstate bridges are unable to accommodate 91,000-pound trucks, which is 11,000 pounds above the current gross vehicle weight limit. Even more troubling is the damage these heavier trucks cause to our local bridges. No truck loads and unloads on an interstate. They all eventually rely on local infrastructure. A recent study by the Coalition Against Bigger Trucks showed over 70,000 local bridges would be put at risk by 91,000-pound trucks, and the cost to replace and repair these bridges would be over $60 billion. In New York, there are 945 bridges put at risk by 91,000-pound trucks, with an estimated cost of more than $1.3 billion to bolster them for heavier truck configurations. This cost burden is an unfunded federal mandate that in the end, local taxpayers will have to foot the bill for. Commissioner Wilcox, does the National Association of Counties have a position on the current debate on heavier and longer trucks? And would these bigger trucks cause more damage to our nation's bridges, creating an unfunded mandate on counties and ultimately on taxpayers?
Thank you, Representative. Yes, the National Association of Counties has been very consistently against the heavier trucks for exactly the points you've made. Bridges and roads are not set up for that weight currently. Without a corresponding allocation of those billions of dollars from the federal government, we would not support raising the limits for those very reasons. As you say, nothing gets from point A to point B without leaving the federal system and crossing a county or city street and bridge. And bridges are a big issue, as you pointed out, and continue to be both just for heavier trucks or for regular traffic.
Thank you. Mr. Hanson, in your testimony, you expressed support for the HALT Act and requires all new motor vehicles to be equipped with advanced drunk driving detection technology. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety estimates that when fully implemented, this law will save over 10,000 lives a year. Clearly, this is a game changer for public safety. NHTSA has already missed the statutory deadline in promulgating a final rule implementing the HALT Act. Per the law, the agency now has a maximum of 3 additional years to finalize the regulation. Can you elaborate on GHSA's support for the HALT Act and why it's important for NHTSA to fulfill its statutory mandate? And what can Congress and stakeholders do to hold NHTSA accountable to complete its rulemaking?
Mr. Chair and members, thank you for that question. Anything that we can deploy to prevent an impaired driving incident from happening is something that is worth looking at. As you correctly mentioned, over 10,000 people a year lose their lives in completely preventable and predictable events when an impaired driving crash occurs. And so the technology, as I testified several minutes ago, in the DADS program is mature. And what we are hearing from manufacturers, that they could have this ready to go by the end of 2025. And so it is something that needs to be looked at from a safety perspective. I think you correctly characterize this as a game changer. Anything that we can do to keep an impaired driver off the road is going to be something that's important. I think as far as our ask from Congress is, it's quite simple. NHTSA has existed for about 8 years without a senatorial confirmed administrator. And without an administrator, there is a lack of leadership. And I think by getting a confirmed administrator in there who is safety-driven and who is willing to push these initiatives forward and embrace these new technologies and the innovation that goes with them, that we can get these things over the finish line. And this is just one example of the technology that can exist out there that will make a significant difference on our road, sir.
Have you talked to the senators as to why they haven't?
I don't have a good answer for you there, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member, for holding this hearing today, and thank you to our witnesses for their testimony and insight.
Bring that microphone a little closer to you.
Oh, sorry. Any better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. As a third-generation business owner in the concrete industry, I know firsthand how important it is that our highways, roads, and bridges across the United States are safe for commuters, citizens, and businesses. Drivers and workers on our nation's roads deserve to be safe, and I look forward to working with members of this committee to implement meaningful legislation and policies that make our roads safer for all. As Chairman Rouser mentioned, according to NHTSA, a disproportionate amount of traffic fatalities occur in rural areas when compared to the percentage of the populations who live there. I appreciate your dedication to the challenges rural communities face, Mr. Willox. Do you believe that current federal safety programs adequately address rural safety needs, or do they tend to favor priorities more aligned with urban challenges?
Thank you, Representative. You know, we're making progress there, but again, it's what works in Wyoming doesn't work in Texas, doesn't work in Florida. So more flexibility in those dollars so that we can be more creative at the local level and accountable, and I think accountability is important. So strides have been made, but again, I think the more flexibility we have at the local level, I mentioned dust control. That's not eligible right now. There are other things. We don't have a ton of pedestrian interactions in a rural state, but it was mentioned in an inner city, that's a bigger deal. So more flexibility in the reauthorization would be beneficial.
Thank you. You talked a little bit about streamlining the permitting issues, and we talked a little bit about the maybe getting better funding for rural projects, but are there other specific steps that we could take in the upcoming surface transportation reauthorization that would help rural communities?
Yeah, I'm a broken record a little bit in the flexibility, but Mr. Hanson even mentioned that, the reporting requirements they're doing, the reporting requirements on grants. If you're going to have a grant system, which I think is incredibly valuable in these programs, sometimes in a rural community, the commissioner is the person writing the grant and trying to implement the grant. And I've been told it's just a checklist. Well, the checklist was 15 pages long. If we can simplify and still have that accountability so that more rural communities and, quite frankly, any county can apply without having to staff up, that would be beneficial. You talked about hundreds of pages of reporting for some of the safety. Anything we can do to reduce those while providing accountability would be valuable.
Thank you. I think both sides of the aisle can agree that the United States is facing an infrastructure challenge. Across the United States, citizens drive on unsafe roads and bridges that are awaiting federal dollars to repair. While Congress can fund infrastructure projects for decades, problems in our supply chain have caused delays in addressing safety concerns. Ms. Norman, in your testimony, you raised concerns with a rule issued in the final days of the Biden administration to rescind the Federal Highway Administration's longstanding general waiver of Buy America. While we all support the need for domestic manufacturing, can you expand on what rescinding this waiver means for safety projects specifically?
Yes, thank you. Can you repeat the last part of your question? I missed it with the door closing.
Sorry. While we all support the need for domestic manufacturing, can you expand on what rescinding this waiver means for safety projects specifically, the Buy America?
Yes, absolutely. And we do also desire to have as much manufacturing and production here in America as well. But for me and my small business, the implementation of that, if it is not done very thoughtfully, we do not have the capacity or the manufacturing abilities in America to meet the needs of the projects that we have on the ground right now. And so it would halt projects. We would not be able to provide the materials needed in order to provide the projects that HSIP funds.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you all for being here today very much. Chairman, I yield back.
Ms. Friedman.
Thank you, Chair Rouser and Ranking Member Norton. And I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. We've all heard the terrible statistics of almost 41,000 people killed on our roads every year, 4,000 of those being in California. And just early morning, we had a terrible fatal crash in Los Angeles on the streets. This is a public health crisis. And while many of those deaths are to people in the vehicle, unfortunately, about 18% of all traffic deaths are pedestrians, and almost 3% are cyclists, other users of the road. I've worked for years on traffic safety issues in California, passing bills around things like automated speed enforcement, on a task force for zero fatalities, and on better laws for cyclists. And while there are certainly conditions that lead to accidents like drivers misbehaving, like bad road conditions, we also know that the majority of our roads were designed to move cars efficiently and quickly, and not designed with safety in mind for drivers or for pedestrians and cyclists. So many times when drivers speed, it's because the road invites them to speed. And I'm also very concerned that the way that we design vehicles has been focused on making the inside of the vehicle safer for those occupants, which is, of course, important. When I was a kid, people didn't always have seatbelts in the back of old cars, right? I mean, you all are nodding. But we have put a lot less focus on the safety of people outside the vehicles. And in fact, we see some of our trucks right now being so elevated that you can't even see a vehicle in front of them, much less a pedestrian or a child. And we certainly have the technology with AI, and we understand enough about engineering to know when the front of a car is conducive on a low-level strike to saving that pedestrian's life, or created with complete disregard to that. So, Mr. Chase, I want to thank you for being here today. And I wanted to know if you could talk about NHTSA and their role in encouraging or mandating vehicle designs that are as safe as they can possibly be to pedestrians and to cyclists. And I'm sorry, that's Ms. Chase.
That's okay. Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety has been working for years to improve roadway safety for all road users. In fact, one of our top priorities was automatic emergency braking with pedestrian and cyclist detection. NHTSA issued a final rule on this last year, which we supported. We wanted to see it implemented more quickly than it was. New cars are required to have AEB with pedestrian detection in 2029. Which will be a tremendous step forward for safety. We've also been working to improve hood and bumper design to be more forgiving if there is a collision with a vehicle and a pedestrian or a bicyclist. So as you mentioned, there are proven solutions known. We need to get them into cars instead of a focus on, as you mentioned, bigger, heavier cars.
Would I hope that this is something that moves quickly, because we certainly have the technology, we know what to do. And I understand that this is a climate of sort of deregulation, but I think that every pedestrian, every child has the right to walk to school knowing that the vehicles that are passing them are designed with their safety and their lives in mind. And we also know that, just because a driver wants a certain type of vehicle, that doesn't mean that it's safe to kind of be out in the world. I'm also wondering how DOT can work to protect pedestrians and cyclists.
How DOT is working to protect? Yeah. Well, in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there were certain directives to have NHTSA issue rules on, in addition to automatic emergency braking, lane departure warning, and other technologies that are part of advanced driver assistance systems. So NHTSA is tasked via this congressional directive to move forward to require these with safety standards in new vehicles.
Thank you very much. And, that act is certainly important. The funding that's in that act is something that I believe will save lives as it starts to be implemented. Mr. Hanson, thank you so much for being here today. And I'm wondering if you can talk about what the Minnesota Department of Public Safety has been doing to reduce speeding and change driver behavior.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. It's really a holistic approach. We work very closely with our Department of Transportation on the infrastructure issues. Obviously, our office works on the behavioral issues. We work with our Department of Health on the injury issues that occur when these crashes occur. The better care that the patients get, the better the outcome is going to be. So it's really kind of taking an all hands-on-deck approach to it. Speeding continues to be our #1 challenge, though.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Shreve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Folks, I'm Jefferson Shreve. I represent the 6th District of Indiana. We describe it as the crossroads of America. The district includes 465 Ring Road around Indianapolis, 4 U.S. interstates crisscross the district. As with so many of my colleagues here, road fatalities are disproportionately higher on our rural roads. And as with my freshman colleagues, I'm new at this, and as we jump in and out of these hearings, it's an extraordinary kind of adjustment to figure out who's asked what as you come back in from another meeting. But I was here at the start, and there were a couple things that piqued my interest, and so if they're not redundant, I wanted to hop around just a little bit. Mr. Willox, Wyoming. I spent a little time there at the University of Wyoming doing a range management program. I was, as Mr. Hanson said, one of those young males who are prone to going fast, and I love that at the time in Wyoming on some rural roads, I don't think there were posted speed limits. Certainly that would play into issues of highway fatalities. Is that the case still today? Are there any states in our union where in certain rural areas you can go about as fast as you want?
Thank you, and go Pokes. Representative, in Wyoming, the statute is if it's an unposted road, there's a speed limit that applies. So it's 55 or 45, so there's a statutory limit. But a lot of roads are unposted, partly because of the daily traffic. We haven't posted them because it's not valuable, but you bring up a point that the reflectivity standards of signs went up about 12 years ago. That increased the cost of signs 20%. So now with the same budget, we can put up less signs and everything has got more expensive over time. So signage is valuable, but sometimes the standards that are implemented mean we buy less signs for the same dollars. And so, yes, there are still unposted roads. Most time they're low volume, but that doesn't mean that there isn't traffic that can be unsafe on it.
On the subject of the design of our rural roads, just north of my district, Hamilton County, Indiana, Carmel, places like that, we have more roundabouts per capita than any other part of the country. The incidence of serious injury accidents, let alone fatalities, are way down with those roundabouts, but they're so darn expensive. They're extraordinarily expensive. Are we making any headway toward the design, lower cost design of roundabout intersections, right-sized, if that's fair to characterize it as such, for rural county intersections? Can we bring those in from a design standpoint at a level that might make it possible to bring those enhancements to secondary, tertiary stretches of roadway?
Thank you for that. I believe those are eligible now. It's really, they are cost more to do the roundabouts than a traditional intersection. We heard some testimony earlier that they can be safer when used right. So I think that is okay to do. Most of our rural roads are so low volume that that's not necessarily the best. In some counties, they have high volume roads, depends on the state. So that's an option that is definitely could be available. I honestly don't know if they qualify as a safety enhancement And so that would be something we'd have to follow up, that if you want to implement this safety enhancement, that would have to be a change to the bill, I believe, and we'll follow up with that to confirm, because I'm not sure it's eligible other than as normal construction at the current way the law is written.
I appreciate that, Mr. Hanson. Thanks again for celebrating your birthday with us this morning. Young males in pickup trucks. It's not the case that pickup trucks, a late model pickup truck isn't inherently less safe than a late model passenger vehicle, is it?
Mr. Chair, members, no, I don't believe so. It's just some of the behaviors that go with those young males in the pickup trucks.
Yeah, I once resembled that. Incidents of road fatalities on motorcycles. We've seen terrific improvements in the safety of vehicles, as Chairman Rouser noted. I mean, those fatalities for passengers in vehicles are down dramatically. Are we seeing similar improvements on motorcycles? Lane departure, emergency braking? Has the industry been able to incorporate some of that technology into motorcycles that have made such a terrific difference in passenger vehicles, light trucks?
Mr. Chair, members, I'm aware that some of the manufacturers are adopting that. I'm not a rider myself, so I don't have a lot of firsthand knowledge there, but I do know that some of the manufacturers are looking at bringing some of those same features to the motorcycle riders, like, the anti-lock braking, the automatic emergency braking, things like that. So I think that technology is ripening.
And the last statement is simply more of a statement. In my district, driver's ed isn't offered in the schools. It's not just kind of part of turning 16. And I think that's investment in that mainstreaming of driver education or the absence of it has been a loss that is.
I'm going to have to cut you off there. Sorry about that, but we can answer that question as we move forward.
Thank you.
I yield back then. Mr. Figures.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you guys for hosting this, holding this hearing, and thank you all for bearing with us here. I know it's tough to grind it out with us more junior members on the committee and sitting here. So thank you guys, and happy birthday to you, Mr. Hanson. And before I go any further, Ms. Chase, my T&I staffer is a proud graduate of Rutgers. So shout out to you and Iyanla. Here she is. What I see as some of the more avoidable safety issues on our highways have to do with construction zone crashes and crashes involving semi-trailers. So can we just kind of go down the line and you let me know in roughly, I guess, 30, 45 seconds each, what you guys are seeing in terms of trends with fatalities in construction zones in your respective areas? Starting with you, Mr. Willox.
Thank you, Representative. So in our county road environment, a lot of times we're dealing with the gravel roads and blades. So we have increased our pilot cars and our flagging because of the volume of traffic that we have there. Maybe sorry, I'm getting feedback. But so we have, earlier I mentioned in our area, we have a lot of drivers that are not native to our area. They've come from out of state, some from out of country. And so we've really had to increase our awareness on the roads to reduce that. But on a gravel road, you're dealing with a blade that's taking up most of the road, so we're stopping traffic, trying to be aware of that. We have more incidents not in work zones, to be honest, because we've tried to do a good job of labeling those, but they're definitely an issue around the country and more expertise down the line.
Mr. Chair, members, if we look at the national stats, work zone crashes are trending down slightly. However, what I can tell you on my personal experience is when they do happen, they're horrific because there is a lot of things, especially when they involve a commercial vehicle, and we've had some challenges with that. I think one of the biggest things that we can look at to continue to improve that is some of the in-vehicle technology we've talked about, that automatic emergency braking, things like that. But I think we can also look at better ways to inform drivers about what they are about to encounter, using digital alerting systems and different avenues like that to actually get that warning into the cab and not just make that a stationary sign on the side of the road. So I think there are ways we can continue to improve those.
Thank you so much for that question. Very personal to me, with 127 team members across Oklahoma that work in those work zones every day. I would say that what we see personally is an increase in distracted driving and the lack of awareness to slower work zone speed limits. We have had recent incidents where, despite the number of devices that are placed to the federal and state standards, drivers are still, for whatever reason, distracted or otherwise coming into and intruding into our work zone where our workers are standing and working and performing their job every day. And so a continued investment into HSIP is so vitally important because we need to continue to lean into the new technologies that are there in cab, as have been mentioned, alerting drivers that there are workers on the roadway, as well as new technologies roadside that we can use to protect our workers in forms of barriers and items such as that.
And Ms. Chase, you can just take the balance of the time.
I think that in addition to what was said by everyone else, which I agree with, because a construction zone basically is a person's workplace in the road, and they're exposed and they need to be protected. So as I mentioned earlier, automatic emergency braking with pedestrian detection will help that if a car is careening toward a construction zone, as has happened, the car will stop itself if the driver doesn't do that. So we need to be improving AEB to address different types of scenarios like that. So we need to improve construction zone safety as well as vehicle safety in order to make those areas safer for the workers.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Norman, I want to give you a little bit of who I am first. I'm in the trucking business, so, and I like to tell people that, especially when we're having meetings like this, because, you know, my office and my employee's office is not inside a building. I mean, we make our living out there on the highway and on the interstates, and I can assure you that 99.99% of the trucking companies out there want to be the safest and be the best on the road. We want to get home to our families as well as everybody else. And last summer, I had the opportunity to tour Sunbelt's asphalt plant in my district, and then we went out to a work zone and actually did a safety video that we released out there to help people understand how important it is, because we want those people to get home safely too. And if you just take a look, say 2023, there were over 42,000 workplace accidents that happened in work zones. There were over 1,000 people that are out there trying to improve our roads and build them that died in 2023. So we need to take a hard look at what we can do. And I guess my question is, what can we do as a committee with the next highway reauthorization bill to support state efforts on work zone safety? I mean, are there certain educational or enforcement efforts that we might can get behind and support?
Well, thank you so much for that question. I would echo that the states are doing a wonderful job of raising awareness. They each have work zone awareness programs that are making a difference, and I think this committee can continue to support the states in doing that. And it does make a difference. Our workers do need to be, they are a vulnerable road user that is often overlooked.
Yes, ma'am. I can't read. Is it Mr. Wilcox? Willox? I was listening to your testimony and talking about rural roads there, and it's something that's bothered me. I live in a very rural section, but unfortunately, Google Maps found our road, and we have a lot of traffic that comes down that road now. And the first time they'll come down through there, they'll be nice about it. But then, as recently as over the weekend, I saw a vehicle pass a vehicle. Now, you know, we've got kids that play on the road, even though we're only one of 3 houses on there. What are some suggestions that can be? I've even asked for speed bumps to be put on our road, but you can't do that because from what I understand, 911 may need to come down through there. But I don't know if you offer any, or Mr. Hanson, if y'all have any suggestions on how you can look at these rural roads and the way Google, or the maps, you don't want to just say Google, but maps have put you on the map.
Thank you for that, and I laugh a little bit because we love the mapping service, but it now has opened up areas. When roads are closed, we've had to pull trucks out of places they never should have been because the map says they are open. It's about drivers' education and appropriate site, not through traffic. Kids, you can only do so much to educate a driver. If a driver is not going to be smart, nothing we do is going to change that. We try to do it at the front end. But I think it is working with our state DOT is actually trying to work with some of the mapping companies. So when roads are closed, we also close the county roads so people don't get in unsafe situations in bad weather.
Right.
For your situation in the normal weather, it's education and signage is the most we can do.
Law enforcement.
And I would just add to that, going back to that toolbox that we can draw from. The first tool that is effective is traffic law enforcement. Along with that, education and outreach, as well as things like dynamic speed signs that draw people's attention to how fast they're going. And it's not just on their dash, it's on that flashing speed sign that they're going by on the road. They have proven to be effective. How long that effect lasts, you got to move those things around so they don't become noise. But that the enforcement component can't be forgotten.
Thank you. I want to make one last comment too. As someone that runs a little over 100 trucks out there, I've tried those automatic braking systems, and we pulled them. They're not fail-proof. If you're ever in a truck doing 65 miles an hour down the interstate, loaded 80,000 gross, and all of a sudden your truck just slams on brakes, and you don't know anything about it, and there's no reason except for the bridge ahead or the construction flashing sign, then you'll understand that these things are not foolproof, and we don't need these mandated until they are, because the car behind you, they don't know what you just slammed on brakes for either, regardless of the fact you may be hitting the windshield of the steering wheel. So they're not foolproof, and people don't understand that these things actually are hurting more than they're helping right now. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Stanton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for all the witnesses for testifying today. I'm heartened that the last two Congress members, both Democrat and Republican, have focused in on roadway safety for those who work in the roads, construction workers, first responders, towers, et cetera. And I want to talk about that as well as part of my questions here today. I think you're going to hear that as a bipartisan priority for this committee. So I do want to talk about three things today. A tragic issue in my state of Arizona, wrong way turns. I want to talk a little bit about Native American communities and the disproportionate increase in crashes on the roads in our Native American communities, and highway safety for our first responders. The rate of highway fatalities has declined in recent years, but we are still above pre-pandemic levels. In fact, Arizona's highways often come up in rankings as some of the most dangerous in the country. A persistent problem that we have in our state is wrong way crashes, especially on our freeway system. There were more than 51 wrong way crashes last year, 9 of which were fatal. To address this, the Arizona Department of Transportation and the Maricopa Association of Governments, which I was fortunate to chair when I was mayor of Phoenix, invested more than $4 million in thermal cameras along Interstate 17, an interstate that crosses both urban and rural areas in Arizona. These cameras catch wrong way turns when they occur, and they prompt a wrong way vehicle ahead alerts on message boards above the freeways. This is not going to stop the behavior that causes the wrong way turns, driving under the influence, distracted driving, et cetera, but it does give other drivers on the road the opportunity to get out of harm's way, shift to the right lane, or exit the freeway. These safety improvements, they are an ounce of prevention for a pound of cure. Mr. Hanson, as part of the Governor's Highway Safety Association, you discussed in your testimony how 402 funds, state highway safety grants, should be given more flexibility to allow for state and local innovation. I couldn't agree more. Could you talk a little bit about how you could see these funds helping places like Arizona with its wrong way driver issues?
Mr. Chair and members, thank you. A great question. And Arizona is not alone. I talked to my partners across the country. Wrong way drivers on our freeway system is a growing and, quite honestly, a very scary problem, because those are high-speed collisions when they do occur. The technology that you mentioned in Arizona, certainly, I think, this is where the behavior part and the infrastructure part come together. And anything we can do to help support our infrastructure partners on this is going to be a step in the positive direction. So I'm familiar with the thermal imaging cameras, but there's also emerging technology in the telematics arena that we can leverage as well for real-time reporting and tracking of that wrong-way driver. And so as technology continues to develop, I think there's some hope on the horizon to prevent these things. But I also, as a trooper, some of the scariest calls that you got were those wrong ways, because you just never know where you were going to find them and how they were going to react to that. So the more information we can get out there early, the better.
All right, thank you for that. Ms. Norman, your testimony on behalf of the American Traffic Safety Service Association, you cite some shocking statistics. Native American children face a traffic crash death rate 8 times higher than others. Native American adults face crash death rates 7 times higher. This is completely unacceptable. What can we do about this situation? There are provisions in the bipartisan infrastructure law focus on highway safety for tribes and tribal communities. What do you think has been most helpful, and what can we do to focus more attention on resources on tribal road safety?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. We want to first thank you for your continued focus on tribal road safety and the increase in the tribal transportation program and the safety set aside within that program. They were great steps forward. My business has had the opportunity to install life-saving devices such as improved pavement markings, guardrails, rumble strips, in an effort to eliminate roadway departures and the crashes that come from that. And so as we have seen with HSIP, those corresponding fatality numbers come down, that investment in safety works. And so we just want to ask that Congress continues to place a focus on tribal roads and ensure that those safety funds get to the communities that need it.
All right, in my state, that is critical. We are so blessed to have over 20 federally recognized tribes. Finally, a similar issue that was mentioned by my colleagues on both the Democrat and Republican side about road safety for our first responders. 1,600 emergency responders have been struck and killed while outside of a disabled vehicle since 2015. Mr. Hanson, can you discuss opportunities before DOT to make meaningful improvements to roadway safety by embracing safety innovation? You may be seemingly asked the same question over and over, but that's because it's a priority for all of us on this committee.
Traffic incident management and training and adherence to best practices traffic incident management is how we mitigate that risk. If it's properly implemented, it is a risk reduction tool. The less time our first responders spend on the side of the road, the less risk of them getting hit.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Hanson, I think I'd heard you say earlier that 10,000 people a year die on the roads because of impaired driving. Is that right? Did I hear that right?
Mr. Chair, members, at least 10,000.
Yeah, at least 10,000. It's remarkably sad. My state, South Dakota, in 2005, pioneered the 24/7 program. Rather than put people who have a problem with addiction, alcohol addiction, rather than put them in prison, they try to hold them accountable and get them healthy in their community. For those who don't know, this is, you wake up in the morning, you go down to the sheriff's office, you blow a PBT, you go about your day. At the end of the day, you come again. It is remarkably effective because it's an accountability mechanism. People know they cannot drink. And this goes on for a series of months. It changes their behavior. It has a 99% success rate. And even after they're off the program, the recidivism rate for those on the program is much lower than it is for those who do not participate in the 24/7 program. My Act, the Sober Act, would expand the reach of that kind of program by incentivizing other states to set up something similar. So any reaction to that program? Are you aware of literature that does indicate it's successful, either in South Dakota or in other states?
Mr. Chair and members, this is a great topic because I think the emerging thought line when it comes to dealing with impaired drivers and reducing that recidivism. Minnesota, we face a 40% recidivism rate. 4 out of 10 will reoffend. Programs like 24/7 Sober that I'm familiar with in South Dakota, I believe North Dakota also, very successful. It's also very closely linked and related to our DWI court program and to intensive supervision and screening for those who find themselves arrested after making that fateful first choice. And so it's a solid program with a proven track record, and it does bear looking at it from any perspective, really.
And one of the things that I like about it, again, it works. That matters. If it didn't work, everything else, I'm not sure anything else matters. But when you put people in prison, all too often, of course, they're going to lose their job. All too often, they're going to lose their family. They're going to lose a lot of these really important connections that are going to help them stay clean once they get clean. 24/7 allows that treatment to take place in the community, allows them to be held accountable, to have those accountability mechanisms in the community. What about other programs? What else has worked to reduce impaired driving?
Well, certainly high visibility enforcement, I couldn't ignore that. When I started in law enforcement, I'll date myself, in the early to mid 1980s, over 50% of the fatalities that we attended were alcohol related. In Minnesota now, we're writing about 30%. So the enforcement and high visibility events have certainly contributed to that. But I think beyond that, addressing the underlying issues that lead to either substance abuse disorder or addiction or these repeat offender problems that we have. The 24/7 program, the DWI courts, the quick intervention programs where somebody is screened for not only chemical issues but mental health issues when they come in for that first court appearance, so that the proper and customized recovery program can be built for them. These are the keys. A one-size-fits-all doesn't work for impaired driving. And as we stare down at an increasing drug-impaired driving issue across the country, this is going to become more critical.
And I would say to my colleagues, part of the reason so many of us on both sides of the aisle like federalism is that it gives us 50 laboratories of democracy to try to figure out, how do you keep those roads safer? How do you save lives? How do you get people clean? And in South Dakota, we have a laboratory of democracy that has developed an evidence-based mechanism that really works. And I would call my colleagues' attention to the SOBER Act. This is an opportunity to add rocket fuel to those state-based efforts. Let's get people clean. Let's save lives. With that, I would yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you. I will just say to my colleague who spoke earlier, and then there are some of those labs that are way underperforming. Having said that, Mr. Willox, more than half of the states have established a state infrastructure bank. My understanding is that Wyoming is one of those states. From your perspective, how have infrastructure banks helped cities meet their infrastructure needs? And if there was a federal infrastructure bank, how can we model this to anticipate some of the future needs in transportation?
Thank you. Grants are an important part of how you can do the big projects. And so through Wyoming, it works through what we call our SLIB, which is a grant program, and the 5 statewide electeds help manage that. What we need is that combination of grants for big projects and direct funding for regular projects. If we don't have the eligibility and the ability to go after grants that can help us with the large projects, many small, underpopulated, or underfunded counties won't have the opportunity to do those projects that are larger in scale and that can be funded through their grant method. So it can work. Again, flexibility is the key. We can't have the box too small. The box needs to be flexible enough to work for New York and Wyoming and Florida and California.
Thank you. Mr. Willox, counties and local governments are major owners of our nation's transportation system, owning about 45% of all public roads. While the bipartisan infrastructure law created additional funding opportunities, a constant issue that I hear from my local stakeholders is that they would like more certainty in federal dollars that they are eligible for. Can you talk about the advantages and disadvantages of creating a dedicated funding source to directly allocate resources to local governments for the improvement and maintenance of local roads and bridge infrastructure?
Well, thank you again. And it goes back to we need both. Direct funding is wonderful, but if you're a small county with a small population, the formulistic number is going to be smaller. A blade costs $500,000 now. If the formula gives you $100,000, that's still 5 years to gather it up. So direct funding is always valuable, consistent funding is valuable, but between continuing resolutions and priority changes between the 5 administrations that I browned and 9 Congresses, there is some uncertainty there, but I think the blend is what's important. We want grants for the larger projects and direct funding for that regular maintenance and ongoing activities.
Thank you. This question is for the whole panel.
My office just met with one of our local MPOs from my district, and we discussed the uncertainty of this administration's repeated directives instructing the Transportation Department to freeze critical federal dollars. From talking to other stakeholders in my district, I know that these actions have created chaos throughout the federal government and uncertainty for the communities and industries that rely on federal programs. Today, I am interested in hearing from you. Can you each talk about how uncertainty in federal funding and project delays caused by funding freezes impacts the organizations you represent?
Thank you, Representative. I think it goes back to my last question. Uncertainty is built into the system. It's a political system. In my time, we've seen uncertainty from administrations. We've seen uncertainty from Congress. CRs create as much uncertainty as anything. So we are used to it. We would love to have certainty all the time, but it seems like every 2 or 4 years there's some uncertainty built into the system, and we'll deal with it.
Thank you. Mr. Hanson?
Any pause in the funding that we depend on in the state highway safety offices potentially could have a negative impact on traffic safety. We would just simply ask that in the event that there is some type of a pause, that the issues or concerns are quickly identified and that the funding stream is restored.
Thank you. Ms. Norman?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. In my experience as a small business owner, I can tell you that it affects us very directly. When there is uncertainty with funding, projects are often halted. If you can imagine, as someone who has orange devices out on the roadway, anytime that funding is halted, those devices have to remain in order to keep the traveling public safe. And so when we have those uncertainties, that's a very small example, but in a more large example would be, we have to make million-dollar investments into equipment to be able to provide these life-saving infrastructure projects. And we cannot confidently do that when we have funding freezes and things like that. And so ASA is looking forward to working together to help us everyone come together to make sure that we have long-term, stable funding for these life-saving projects.
Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety does not receive any federal grant funding. However, I agree with what Ms. Norman just said, that the stability to safety grant programs is essential, especially at a time when our roadways are experiencing historic highs in fatalities and injuries.
Thank you very much. I'm out of time. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Knott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the panel, thank you for being here. I wish I had more than 5 minutes. This has been very interesting and stimulating. Mr. Willox, I want to start with you. Coming from North Carolina, there's a lot of need in my district, where we are the proverbial small town America that is receiving dozens and dozens every day, people moving out of the bigger cities into these local communities. And I want to touch on a point that you raised earlier, the need to streamline the delivery of dollars and real results to the taxpayers, to these programs. And if you could just, I would say, identify what the main issue is with the delays, with the inefficiencies in the system, and how we could address that so that the taxpayers get a more immediate return on the investment that we send up for transportation.
Yeah, thank you. In my 19 years, permitting has always been an issue. In the West, a huge federal presence is going to be different than in your. But if you're dealing within an existing right-of-way, so a lot of what we do is non-virgin territory, the ability and permitting should be relatively easy so that you can improve an existing road, whether it's safety or widening, and that isn't uniformly accepted. Under NEPA, categorical exclusions, broadening that would be helpful. BLM and Forest, different administrations have different focuses on different things. And then if you're doing grants, and Mr. Hanson referred to it, if you're going to apply for a grant, let's make it simpler, easier to comply with. Application is easy. It's actually when you get the grant that is harder. So anything we do to simplify that, make it easier to do would be valuable.
Would you say that the issues arise from overlaying or overlapping regulations, or is it inefficiencies within the delivery system? How would you pinpoint the root problem?
Yes. It's a little bit of everything. You know, sometimes it's overlapping jurisdictions. Sometimes it's just the boxes you've got to check to get through. I wish there was a simple answer, and that's why it's not easy to simplify. But we have to trust our local government partners, and if we don't trust them,
then say that, but don't say we trust you and then make you jump through 15 hoops. Trust local government. We're elected to represent our people and be good stewards of tax dollars.
It seems like the perverse incentive is it consolidates all of the approvals in Washington, and then there's all types of justifications for the delay at the cost of local needs and certainly towns like North Carolina. I also want to talk to you just briefly about disaster-related needs to rebuild. If you could pinpoint any kind of solution to, there's a disaster that wipes out a road, how can we better deliver a federally funded recovery project in those instances?
Fortunately, I haven't had to deal with one directly, but all the recent instances have made us think more about it. I think the key is to make sure we don't have to jump through too many hoops so we can be quick. Yep. Speed is what's important, accountability is important, but you can't do it without federal dollars. We need those federal dollars when a disaster hits a county, so we need the flexibility to implement it without jumping through too many hoops, waivers of some of the requirements so you could sole source when necessary without doing the bidding, and some of that exists, but it is a challenge to blend that. You generally got the state involved, but continue to make those funds available, allow the flexibility and speed to be able to respond.
Great. Mr. Hanson, just briefly, in regards to the last, I would say, 5 years, there's been a fairly unprecedented assault on law enforcement, on local law enforcement especially. What effect has that had on road safety and the ability to protect the roadways?
Thank you for the question, and Mr. Chair and members, it's had a negative effect. Law enforcement is taxed in ways that I could never imagine when I worked in the field. Agencies are critically short-staffed, and when they're critically short-staffed, oftentimes the first thing that gets cut is that traffic unit. 911 calls have to be answered, I get that. But traffic enforcement and traffic safety activity is as much a part of any public safety strategy as policing is. And so we need to continue to rebuild the ability for agencies and the ability for communities to understand why traffic safety is important.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, unfortunately, I'm out of town. I yield back.
Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for holding today's hearing on a very vitally important topic that probably doesn't get the amount of attention that it deserves when you consider the fact that we still have 40,000 fatalities on our roads every year. This is one of the leading, if not the leading cause of preventable deaths in this country. And these are tragedies that strike folks of all backgrounds, of all ages, and happen suddenly and cause, cascading amounts of grief for those who are close to them. So it should be a absolutely leading priority of this committee and of our government at all levels to do everything possible to reduce these tragedies. And I was reading through all of the testimony for today's hearing, and there's a lot of great work being done by your various associations. I was a little surprised that autonomous vehicles were barely discussed at all, maybe a couple times in passing. I believe a couple of the witnesses mentioned that there will continue for the foreseeable future to be a mix of levels of autonomous vehicles or levels of autonomy within vehicles that are on the road, which is undoubtedly true. But I would think that for a hearing that's focusing on safety, this would be a little more of a focus given the clear evidence that we see right now that those autonomous vehicles that are on the road are indeed improving safety. For example, Waymo, which has been operating in San Francisco and Phoenix for some time, recently started operating in Los Angeles and is expanding, I think, to 3 other areas in this coming year. Data shows that over 33 million miles driven in Phoenix and San Francisco, the Waymo vehicles have had 81% fewer airbag deployment crashes, 78% fewer injury-causing crashes, 62% fewer police-reported crashes. There was a study done by an insurance company that found that with Waymo autonomous vehicles, there were 88% fewer property damage claims and 92% fewer bodily injury claims. Likewise, Tesla is probably the other leader in this space and has what it calls its full self-driving capability that's available for a fee to millions of Tesla owners and has been improving quite rapidly recently. Their data shows that there's 1 crash per 7.0 8 million miles driven. Actually, that's just with autopilot engaged, which is about 10 times more miles driven per accident as folks who are driving unassisted. And keep in mind that this is the worst the technology is ever going to be. It's iterating rapidly. It's going to get better. It's going to get safer. And it holds the vast potential to reduce the number of fatalities on our road to really minimal levels. So I guess my question, and I'll just throw this out to any witness who would like to answer it, is shouldn't encouraging the adoption of autonomous vehicle technology for more drivers, especially as the technology improves, not just be one facet of our transportation planning, but really be a major imperative of U.S. transportation policy?
Thank you for the question. I'll take the first shot at it. Advocates supports proven technology such as automatic emergency braking and other advanced driver assistance systems that we know, based on research from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, the National Transportation Safety Board, and others, will in fact save lives. While I agree with you that autonomous vehicles are improving based on the research that we have seen, it's still a small comparison compared to the larger driving set of how much people are driving on the roads. So while we see promise, we want to make sure that the promises offered are delivered, and we believe the way to do that is through transparency, accountability, and regulation.
Mr. Hanson.
Thank you for the question. As my friend, retired Colonel Matt Langer would put it, technology will eventually save us from ourselves, and we're getting there. Autonomous vehicles will eventually make an incredible difference on our roads. I would agree that we're not quite there yet, and I think the thing that is lacking is that overall federal guideline that everybody follows, much like the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards as applied to connected and automated vehicles. That's the missing link that we really need to look at right now.
Can you just expound a little bit? I know you're short on time on what that should look like.
I'm sorry.
Could you just expound a little bit on what that should look like?
Much like if you look at the transportation system and the regulations that surround it, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the federal government, they cover the vehicle part of it. The states then have their traffic safety laws. If you look at how traffic safety laws developed in the early part of the 19th century, every state had their own code. Many of them conflicted with each other. Well, the federal government had to step in and develop a more uniform code that all of the states would abide by, and then the feds took over through NHTSA, or whatever the body was at that time, the design parameters and the safety parameters for the vehicles that use that infrastructure.
Thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Gillen.
Thank you. Mr. Hanson, in New York, more than 30% of fatal crashes are alcohol-related, which is unacceptable. In 2023 on Long Island, more than 220 people were tragically killed in car crashes, and Nassau County has been the second deadliest county for car crashes in 6 out of the last 10 years. Long Islanders should not have to take their lives into their hands every time they get behind the wheel. As a law enforcement officer, what do you need to be able to increase safety and crack down on drunk and reckless drivers?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear the last part of your question, ma'am.
So what do you need from us to help us improve safety and crack down on drunk and reckless drivers on the road?
The thing that will make the biggest difference for us is more flexibility, as Mr. Willox has commented on. More flexibility in the federal 402 and 405 funds for us to be creative, to be innovative, and to be proactive. The way I would describe it, for years, we rely on historic crash data. That's data that's collected after something bad has happened. Well, we're entering an age now where we have technology and we have data that we can harvest in real time that allows us to be much more proactive in preventing events from occurring in the first place. So having that freedom and that flexibility to be innovative, to be creative, to color outside the lines, so to speak, is going to be critical for state highway safety offices moving forward as we develop the next generation of countermeasures to make our roads safer.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Chase, in your written testimony, you spoke a bit about using roundabouts. to improve the flow of traffic and also to enhance safety. And I was wondering if you could share, this was something my husband talks about roundabouts all the time. Have you seen how we have aging infrastructure in Long Island, but I would imagine it would be difficult to implement the use of roundabouts. Have you seen it successfully implemented in places where there was aging infrastructure, but it was employed successfully?
Thank you for the question. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, which is an organization we rely upon to do research, has found that injury crashes have been reduced up to 80%, and all crashes at intersections, and this is when you go from a stop sign or a red light to a roundabout, reduced by about 50%. So that's pretty remarkable. With regards to aging infrastructure that you mentioned specifically, I don't have that data, but we'd be glad to look into it, and we strongly support roundabouts for that reason. It's a proven solution, and in addition to making the road safer, it improves the efficiency of motorists.
Thank you. I would love to get some information about successful implementation.
Glad to try to provide that.
Thank you. And Leslie, this could be for anyone. I was with folks just 2 nights ago who were talking about the shocking number of roadside workers who are killed each year. And what are some of the best ways that we as Congress can help reduce the number of fatalities and improve roadside conditions?
I'd be glad to take that. Thank you for the question. Again, one of the things that I think can be most important is that we can bring stakeholders together to talk about best practices and about what's working. There are new technologies. One that we utilize is a telematic-based technology that we have on our vehicles when they are in an active work zone that is communicating to drivers in cab that there are workers on site. There is a work zone ahead. It is audible. It is getting that attention. And that is something that we have implemented over the last couple of years, and it has given a great sense of security to our workers that we are taking another step to let people know that they are in their office on the side of the road.
If I could add to what Ms. Norton just said, we were pleased that in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the use of federal grants were expanded for automated enforcement in work zone and construction zones because they've been widely effective in reducing crashes in those areas. And we hope that in the next reauthorization, it's expanded even further.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Mr. Desaulnier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the witnesses. Mr. Chase, I wanted to follow up and invite some of the other witnesses to comment on an earlier comment and exchange with one of my Republican colleagues. So I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. When I was in the legislature, I was very involved in being one of the first states to prohibit holding your phones. And I was always amazed that the compliance rate was as good as it was. But with new technology, it always adds so much benefit, and a lot of my businesses in the area I represent are always very aggressive about their product, understandably, but getting it right so that you're not inhibiting innovation, but you're making sure you're doing the right thing. We got it right in California, I think, with hands-free driving. But on the other hand, we were too lax, I think, on self-driving vehicles. So now we're trying to come back. So my question to you, and maybe Ms. Norman, if you have any insights, Mr. Hanson or Mr. Wilcox, what's the research show about peer-reviewed, looking at these kind of new technologies to make sure they're safe before we deploy them without over-regulating the community? There's a sweet spot there that I think we're still struggling with.
Thank you for the question. We've been watching San Francisco very carefully in terms of autonomous vehicles and have been really struck by the dangers that have been employed. The San Francisco fire chief has spoken about fire trucks being prohibited from getting to scenes, and the police chief has spoken about the police officers not being able to get to a live shooting scene. And these are, this is what's being reported in the news by and large. So we're concerned that even more incidents are happening that we're not aware of. We have always contended that autonomous vehicles need to have federal safety regulations just like other cars. And I'll just give one quick example. Right now, when a person goes to get a driver's license, they have a vision test. But right now, an autonomous vehicle, which will be doing the seeing and responding because there's no person, there's no minimum standard to make sure that the car can see, if you will. So that's just one quick example of regulation that we've been supporting.
Thanks. Ms. Norman, you have any comments?
Yes, thank you. I think one of the things that we would like to highlight of importance when we have the conversations about AVs and CAVs is that there is so much changing in work zones regularly. You've got lane changes throughout the day as contractors are doing their job building the road. And so we have to make sure that all the stakeholders are working together, and we look forward to being a big part of that with the work zone focus to ensure that those CAVs and AVs see our devices and our people and do not cause more harm.
Mr. Hanson, I want to throw in another question, if you could address briefly. I have a district that has very long commutes. A lot of our big employers in San Francisco, Salesforce, have said they want to go to 3-day weeks. So this push to get everybody back in the office, if you have any comments about that and safety, because I've got people who drive an hour and a half, 2 hours both ways, and that affects safety. So any comments you might have, Mr. Hanson, because you represent a sort of similar area.
Certainly as traffic volume, traffic volume increases, the problems on our road does increase. You know, what we saw when 2020, when COVID arrived, and the roads emptied out, you know, we fully expected to see a significant drop in the fatality rate. Well, in fact, contrary to historical data, we saw an exponential increase in the number of fatal and serious crashes that were taking place. And this was across the country. And it was really led by speed. And the way I've kind of put it out there before is there was a lot more lane space for folks to use and, quite honestly, to abuse. And so the problem is some of those bad behaviors that manifested themselves at that time period have continued now. And even though our VMT, or the number of vehicles on the road now, is higher than it was pre-pandemic, we're still seeing people drive in extremely reckless ways.
Mr. Wilcox, any observations from NACO on either of the questions?
Well, you know, in rural areas, we've always returned to work because he could not. But I do think it's about the traffic and human behavior, and I do think Mr. Hanson was correct. There are times that people got lazy because there was less traffic on the road, so I think that's important. I want to go back to autonomous vehicles. There's a big difference between rural autonomous vehicles. A gravel road and autonomous vehicles are not. The standard has not been created for that. An urban environment is. But let me give you another point that's interesting on autonomous vehicles. There's been discussion about going from 4-inch paint to 6-inch paint for autonomous vehicles and for visibility. That's 50% more paint that local government has to put on the road. There's a cost associated with the safety improvements needed, not just for autonomous vehicles, but that visibility, and we can't lose sight of that as we look at that technology enhancing and moving forward.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Moulton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to start by saying how much I share your concern for road safety and improving road safety. It's an extraordinary number of Americans who die every year on our roads, many of them driving, many of them just simply trying to cross the street, as sadly happened to a 5-year-old amazing girl in my district who died in a crosswalk, crossing right in front of her family, doing absolutely nothing wrong, in fact, doing everything right. But she was run over by a truck. So I want to talk about what we can do to improve road safety. And Ms. Chase, I know you've done a lot of work on this. The chairman mentioned the importance of police enforcement. I agree. We need to enforce the rules. We need to enforce the law. People should follow the law. The laws aren't just there to look good. They're meant to do something. What about traffic cameras? Are they effective at enforcement?
Yes, they are. We support automated enforcement safety cameras both for red light running and for speed because they have been proven by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety to reduce crashes. So we strongly support them, and we urge Congress in the next reauthorization bill to expand the use of federal funds so that localities can afford to use them.
And how do traffic cameras compare to police enforcement in effectiveness?
Well, we consider automated enforcement as a supplement to law enforcement, not a replacement, because I think both are very important. As has been discussed earlier in this hearing, law enforcement efforts in terms of traffic safety have reduced. So it's time, we would like to see them, the effective use of law enforcement to enforce traffic safety laws back on the rise, and we would also like to see the use of automated enforcement.
I mean, I agree with that. I've spoken to my local police chief about the importance of traffic enforcement, and he's shared with me some of the challenges that he has in just doing this duty. But I also understand that statistically, cameras are even more effective because everyone knows there's a camera there all the time. You don't have to see a police car. Is that not correct?
That is correct. We also, it's very important that the automated enforcement systems are done properly, because if not, then there could be a backlash, and that has happened in certain areas. So we want to make sure that they are done effectively. Our organization, together with GAHSA and other organizations, put together a safety checklist for localities on how to implement automated enforcement automated enforcement systems safely, and that can be, I think that's widely available on the website.
And I see a lot of nodding heads there. Is there anything that Mr. Hanson or Mr. Wilcox you'd like to add to this?
Thank you. NACO and counties are very diverse, so we like that option of having those traffic cameras. That's a policy choice that sometimes gets a lot of pushback in local areas, but having that option available, would absolutely love that chance, so various counties could take advantage of it if available.
Yeah, I get that there's pushback because some people like to break the law, right? But the problem is that when it results in deaths, you know, it's one thing if you're, you know, speeding out in the middle of the desert and you might run over a jackrabbit. But if you might run over a 5-year-old kid crossing the street, it's a different story. There's some new data that's come out on the effectiveness of no right on red. Now, I like turning on right on red just as much as the rest of us. Sometimes it can get you home faster. But it's pretty easy to understand how when you're looking left to see the cars coming, you might not be looking right in the crosswalk for someone crossing the street. So the data is pretty clear. And yet, the champions of federalism, the people who say that local communities should make their own decisions, the Republican Party is the one banning the enforcement of traffic cameras, banning no right on red signs in Washington, D.C. Even though the data clearly supports the fact that when you ban these enforcement systems, you say to locals, you can't make your own decisions because a bunch of politicians from out of state are going to come in and make them for you. For the 3.5 days a week that we're here, more pedestrians are going to die. I don't know about you, but that doesn't seem right to me. Doesn't seem like selfless service to the country. Doesn't seem like living up to your own principles and values. And it doesn't seem like making our roads safer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chairman recognizes Mr. Cohen for 5 minutes.
Apologize for not hearing your remarks. I kind of tried to read them. I've had judiciary today, and that's a committee I've not paid as much attention to as I should have last 2 terms because we had the aeronautics, aviation.
I'm not sure your microphone is on. Well, it's on. Bring it to you. There you go.
Yeah, there we go, I guess. Let me get my remarks, and we'll get going. Thank you, Chairman Rouser and Ranking Member Norton. Roadway safety is a national crisis, and it is, and we've talked about it. And Congress must act decisively in the next surface transportation reauthorization bill to implement life-saving policies. One of the things I've worked on has been complete streets, and as I'm sure you all know, complete streets reduces fatalities. It makes people who are pedestrians or bicyclists or whatever they do, they little green things that look like Vespas or something without motors, have more safety when they're on the streets, and that's important too. Memphis has got a whole lot of pedestrian deaths, and it's so sad. We could fix that with plannings and better design streets and walkways and set our designated walkways. So we need to do things about that and help people, and we've had some declines in deaths, but 40,000 people died in motor vehicle crashes in 2023. That's motor vehicles, so that doesn't include all the pedestrian deaths, of which there are thousands and thousands. Proven solutions exist to help us try to reach zero goal of 0 roadway deaths. Well, that's not going to happen. But if we can get it down by half or a third or whatever, we strive for that as a goal, but realistically, we'll do what we can do. We've got certain bills that I've introduced. The DOT Victim Safety Advocate Act to ensure crash victims and their families have a dedicated voice in transportation policy. And they should. This is a devastating thing to their families. They lose family members, never get over it, and they should have the right, and we can learn from them, and they can be the force that drives legislation that can save people's lives. Complete Streets Act, which I just discussed a little bit, design roads to prioritize safety for all road users. The School Bus Safety Act implement essential protections for our children, such as seatbelts on school buses. I've seen so many kids killed in crashes in school buses, and seatbelts, I think, would save lives. I know there's problems of chairs 90 degrees and they go back and all that, but the seatbelts work, and I think they would be helpful. I know there's battles between local governments that want to spend the money and the seatbelt people, et cetera, but the kids' lives are at stake. The Stop Underrides Act, which came to me from a constituent whose child was killed when the car went underneath a truck. It would prevent horrific underride crashes that claim lives of too many Americans. So many cars can go under trucks, and then I think my staffer is going to go crazy when I say this. He's not going to go crazy because he's a very stable and good woman. But Jane Mansfield, that's a child, I remember that. Underrides can be devastating and kill people. Additionally, the bipartisan infrastructure law created critical programs, including the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, which has demonstrated local communities can reduce traffic fatalities when given the necessary resources. I look forward to our discussion, which we've already had, on how Congress can further advance these critical safety initiatives in the upcoming Transportation Safety Bill. So thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Seeing no other members that have not already spoken or wish to speak, the hearing for today, well, let me back up and let me just thank our witnesses for your great testimony. Very informative subcommittee hearing, and it wouldn't have been so without you and your contributions. So thank you very much. Seeing no one else, this concludes our hearing for today. Subcommittee stands adjourned.